All right, good afternoon. We're going to go ahead and get started. Thanks everybody for staying so late with us today. I'm going to try my best to get us out of here and we'll get kicked off. All right. So first of all, we wanted to just take a moment to thank and acknowledge Dr. Roy Herbst for all of his years of service on LungMap. He gave an outstanding plenary today. I hope many of you could attend that, and if not, I do encourage you to try to watch it later on. He's just done a phenomenal job with LungMap and gave us a history, the 10-year history of LungMap, to see where we have been, how we started, where we've been, where we are now, and where we're going in the future. And we really could not be where we are now, or even think about what our future would look like without Roy. And wanted to thank him very much for his passion, his enthusiasm, his dedication and commitment and service over all of these years. So please join me in thanking and congratulating Dr. Herbst. All right, we also want to take a moment to thank our LungMap Vice Chair, who's served in this role over 2 years now. This is Dr. Jyoti Patel, and she is from the Alliance Group. And we know that LungMap is representative of a public and private partnership, and at the core of it is collaboration. And this collaboration is across multiple cooperative groups. It is also a collaboration with FNIH and the NCI, a collaboration with the FDA, a collaboration with industry and with our friends at Cancer Research. And Dr. Patel has really been instrumental in driving forward our screening protocol. And you'll see an amendment coming through with some updates really to broaden the eligibility criteria, in particular where it comes to the specimen testing. And will hopefully continue to improve on that and work to add in liquid biopsies in the eligibility criteria. She will remain within LungMap and remain as a study champion, and I wanted to thank her for her service for over these years. So thank you, Dr. Patel. All right. Is Dr. Patel on the line?
I don't see her.
Okay. So we also wanted to announce with Dr. Herbst and Dr. Patel stepping down, we've unanimously voted that we have a new chair and vice chair, and this will be Dr. Haas Borgai from ECOG and Dr. Karen Rettkamp from SWOG. And so, with the SWOG, we've moved now from an alliance and SWOG leadership to a SWOG and an ECOG leadership, but still keeping every team on the leadership level. So really want to thank them for agreeing to come on board. I don't know if Dr. Rettkamp is here and wants to come and say some words. I'm putting her on the spot again. She's been such a good sport about this. You can either come on up here, or there's a microphone over there. I really think it's a great opportunity for you to hear from her and hear her vision for the future.
Hi.
There you go.
We're excited to move LungMap and continue the momentum that has already been going. Very exciting to hear Roy's presentation earlier today. And again, I've said this before, but now I understand kind of this 10-year runway that we're on, and we really have that momentum to move forward in more novel and innovative ways. And we're starting to see that with some of the new sub-studies coming on board, and some of the new ways that we're going to allow patients to come into LungMap. So look forward to seeing what happens next, and look forward to using Roy's expertise and experience to bringing LungMap to new levels. So thank you.
Thank you. We're really excited and energized to have this new team and a fresh set of eyes, and I think they make a fantastic team. It's been an absolute pleasure to work with them during this transition phase. All right, we also want to take a moment while Dr. Herbst will be stepping down from the chair role. He is not allowed to leave us, and he will be serving in the chair emeritus role for LungMap and a senior advisor. And so we want to also thank him for his future service, and we will certainly be leaning on him for a lot of guidance throughout the years to come. And I want to ask Dr. Herbst to maybe say some words quickly.
Thanks, Janelle, and thank you all. We've really been a great team in the Lung Committee doing Lung Map, working across all the cooperative groups across an NCTN, and I'm very excited to continue doing that. Let's just remember we've put 4,800 registrations on the Lung Map trial, and now we'll do even more with more sub-studies, with improved and better science. We just had a wonderful meeting the last 2 hours upstairs, so excited to continue to work with you and Mary and the SWOG and all the cooperative groups on this important trial. So thank you.
And thank you, and congratulations again. All right, so I think you guys heard this the last time I was here, but just to lay the landscape, I think we're already touching on a lot of these pillars that I have here for my vision, and one is ushering new treatment paradigms, and you hear some more from one of our keynote speakers. You will also, we want to focus on reaching more diverse patient populations, as well as diversifying our lung committee and helping to train the next generation of researchers, including diverse researchers. And you'll hear also from our other keynote speaker on those topics as well. Here's the overall agenda that will keep moving forward. So we'll start off now by moving to the publications and abstracts. So congratulations to everybody on numerous publications and abstracts that have been successfully submitted, reviewed, and accepted, and those that have been published. So I do want to take a moment here and highlight one here with Dr. Vadia as well as Dr. Redmond. We talk about looking at diversity in clinical trials. The Lung Map protocol, master protocol, has really served as a model, as well as the SWOG adult NCTN network has served as a model of how we can successfully reach more diverse patient populations. And if you compare what has been able to be accomplished on trials such as this compared to the studies that we see, many times that we see out there run in the large registration phase 3 studies, with the diversity on our trials is we're doing very well. And this speaks to why it is important to continue to develop and run trials through this network. So congratulations to all of the team members. So we are going to go now directly to the patient advocate update with Ms. Judy Johnson, who I believe is joining us online. Judy?
Yes, hi, thank you so much. Hi, everybody. I appreciate the chance to talk to you all for just a few minutes about what's going on with advocacy. Next slide, please. So here are the topics I'll focus on for the next few minutes. Next slide, please. So the leading principle of the SWOG Cancer Research Network is that patients are our highest priority. SWOG has lived this value by building the largest and most sophisticated patient advocate program in the National Clinical Trials Network, and I'm very proud to be a part of it. Next slide, please. So we have two kinds of advocates at SWOG, research advocates and community advocates. We all provide the same service, though, with the same goal, to bring the voice of the patient into SWOG clinical trials. Next slide, please. Here's where we stand with community advocates today. We have 5 active advocates who focus on those first 5 communities you see, and we are recruiting for the communities shown in red. Next slide, please. Here's a look at my SWOG advocacy roles. In the lung executive and working groups, most of the time I spend is participating in teleconferences, webinars, executive review, and study team planning and development. I've got similar responsibilities within Lung Map, and I'm also an active member of the Lung Map Accrual Enhancement Committee. As the advocate member of the Community Engagement Subcommittee, I provide the patient perspective to identify challenges and opportunities for conducting clinical trials in the community. Within SWOG's Clinical Trials Partnership, I'm the advocate member of their Scientific Advisory Board, serving as an advocate reviewer for trials within my expertise, and I act as a voting member during their executive review process. Next slide, please. I'll spend a little bit of time on this slide because it's a big focus of what I do to add back value within our committee. So with the study PIs and members of the Lung Map Accrual Enhancement Committee, we collaborate to develop thoughtful accrual plans and support ongoing accruals. For Dr. Daly's S1914, the recently amended study comparing SBRT to SBRT plus atezo, language is under review that we can share with study sites and advocacy groups that could help increase accrual. I'm going to say Dr. O's name with an O because I know I'll butcher it if I don't. So in Dr. O's study, S1934, for superior sulcus patients, he presented the study to the Lung Community Engagement Subcommittee and has answered physician questions on MedNet, which is a virtual physician community. The Lung Map Accrual Enhancement Committee has collaborated with PIs of the 3 sub-studies you see here to identify potential challenges to accrual. Next steps, which we're very excited about, include email-based surveys for the 1800D non-match study. We also plan to conduct telephone interviews with site leaders to ask them if they've had challenges enrolling to S1900E and 1800D. Also, they'll be asked if they have presented 1900F for RET fusion positive non-small cell lung cancer to patients, and if so, have they identified any patient questions or concerns? These interviews also offer a great opportunity to learn from the sites what they need from us to increase accrual from underrepresented groups and what they have found are successful approaches to diversifying accrual. Many thanks to Frank DeSanto for developing the interview questions and survey. For S1934, 1900E, and 1900F, I posted links to SWOG's patient-friendly trial description and clinicaltrials.gov on Facebook pages that focus on these types of lung cancer. Next slide, please. SWOG is really fortunate to have incredibly talented staff members, Frank DeSanto, Communications and Public Relations Manager, and Amanda Stamplis, Plain Language Medical Writer. Collaborating with study teams, they've developed attractive, easy to read trial summaries and social media toolkits for the studies shown here. And I understand that the CIRB just approved S1900E, so you can check that one off too. These summaries are posted on the SWOG website for easy access, and since they're CIRB approved, they can be shared widely without any additional approvals. Next slide, please. Here's an example for you to see. It's a portion of the trial summary and social media toolkit for S1800D. It's laid out in a user-friendly, attractive way, which always makes it easier for people to engage and read them. Next slide, please. Last March, Lung Map Leadership and the Lung Map Accrual Enhancement Committee presented a patient advocate webinar in collaboration with Friends of Cancer Research to bring advocates up to speed on Lung Map and open the door to ongoing communications. We hope to have more webinars in the future as Lung Map continues to evolve. Recently, Ms. Andrea Ferris, President and CEO of Longevity, joined the Lung Map Drug Selection Committee. Ms. Kim Norris, President of the Lung Cancer Foundation of America, joined the Lung Map Trial Oversight Committee. Both Ms. Ferris and Ms. Norris are highly experienced advocates and have served as members of the NCI Thoracic Malignancy Steering Committee. Their insight and involvement in the Lung Map development process will ensure that external advocacy group perspectives are a part of the Lung Map development process. Next slide, please. From voting on new concepts to collaborating throughout design, development, and implementation, I work with study PIs and SWOG's outstanding lung protocol development team to provide the patient perspective, including suggestions for patient-friendly language in informed consent documents. You'll hear more from Dr. Ruttkamp about the exciting Project Pragmatica trial. This summer, the study team went into overdrive to develop and move this concept through quickly. It was fast and furious, and we are all really excited about this transformational trial. Dr. Pata and I have collaborated closely to talk about possible ways to increase patient interest in S1900E and ease their burden to participate. The Lung Map Accrual Committee includes this trial in their interview outreach plan to identify challenges and opportunities. Dr. O's study for superior sulcus disease is challenged by the rarity of this form of cancer. Following FDA approval of atezolizumab, the study team moved quickly to talk with NCI and revise the protocol and informed consent. Next slide, please. So advocacy groups are an important way for us to share information about our trials. We have already established relationships with these large broad-based groups and small oncogene-based groups. And I will talk to you a little bit about our efforts with longevity. Next slide, please. Here's a screenshot provided by my contact at Longevity, showing how they shared information about Dr. O's superior sulcus study. The posting was made on a closed patient group. I'm told by my contact at Longevity that they are planning to launch a public-facing portion of their website where they will be listing these opportunities as well. That way, anyone who accesses their site will be able to see it, not just those who belong to their closed groups. In the meantime, they've offered us a template to complete for any trial that we'd like to highlight within their closed groups. Next slide, please. So as we proceed with building awareness within these groups, we have challenges and opportunities. Each organization has unique ideas and processes in place to guide if, when, and how they share information about clinical trials within their constituencies. We'll collaborate with them to look for ways that work for them and for SWOG. With all of you as members, you may know contacts within one or more advocacy organizations, and I'm happy to work with you to develop outreach strategies. Just let me know. Next slide, please. In closing, I'd like to reemphasize SWOG's leading principle. Patients are our highest priority. I'd like to introduce you to Laura, who I met at an IASLC targeted therapies meeting about 4 years ago. She shares her story here. Please take just a minute to read it. Laura is an inspiration to patients, physicians, advocates, and everyone she meets. She had this shirt made, and I don't know if you can see it, but it says "Die, Cancer, Die." And she had it made before her first brain radiation treatment in 2018. She's worn it the first day each time she begins another round. This was her 5th time wearing the shirt. Her journey inspired Laura to become an active research and patient advocate, including serving for a number of years with DoD's CDMRP Lung Cancer Research Program. It is an honor to know her, and I hope that you are inspired by her story. Next slide, please. 49 pills a day. Wow. This is a reality check on the volume of medications that some lung cancer patients need to take, as shared by Laura on Facebook. Let's keep this in mind and the many other challenges that our patients face as we work together to develop SWOG lung trials. Next slide. So today I talked to you about SWOG's patient advocate community and reviewed results as your lung committee research advocate and initiatives underway. I'm excited to keep collaborating with all of you on our common goal to offer meaningful clinical trials to lung cancer patients that they want to and can participate in, and to make a positive difference in their lives. Thank you so much for all that you do to help lung cancer patients. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Judy. That was phenomenal. And we'll open the floor to see if anyone has any questions for Judy at this time.
My email's there if you want it.
All right, thank you again, Judy.
Thank you. You're welcome.
All right, I don't know if we have Dr. Wayne Hofstetter, if he's joining us virtually or someone representing for him online.
Perhaps he's doing an operation.
Okay, we'll move to the next agenda item. Okay, oops. All right, so I'll invite Dr. Megan Daly to come give us the update from the Thoracic Radiation Subcommittee. I know they had a great meeting earlier today.
Hi, everyone. I'm happy to be giving an update on our radiation portfolio within the lung committee at SWOG. So just an outline quickly of what I want to touch on, but what I don't have in my slides is an update from this morning. We did have a wonderful joint radiation surgical subcommittee meeting. This is the first year that we have formally combined the two subcommittees, and we all agreed that that worked very nicely. We were able to get a lot of multidisciplinary input on several proposals, especially ones that were really relevant across specialties. So we're planning to keep that format going forward, and we definitely encourage any medical oncologists or other specialists who are not radiation oncologists or surgeons to join us at those future subcommittee meetings too. We had some great discussions. And some preliminary discussions about a potential stage 3 protocol and a potential oligo progression protocol. So hopefully updates at future SWOG meetings. Just going to quickly run through our radiation trial portfolio, which I think is really quite good right now, and then also touch on our SWOG, our sponsored SWOG endorsed trials from other cooperative groups. First, wanted to congratulate the LU005 team. Our SWOG champion for this was Dr. Charles Hsu. I don't believe he's here today, but they recently completed accrual in the United States. It's still briefly undergoing additional accrual in Japan to complete their Japanese cohort, but this was really a success story. They completed accrual ahead of schedule, and this was in limited stage small cell lung cancer. But because of the closure, we now potentially have additional patients who can enroll on Maverick, which is Dr. Chad Resthoven's trial looking at PCI in both extensive and limited stage small cell lung cancer. This is a very pragmatic design, allowing use of hippocampal avoidance, allowing memantine. And it is a trial that could really use some help on accrual because they have a big accrual goal that they're potentially looking at revising. But in the meantime, please consider opening this if you don't have it open already. We also have a sizable portfolio open in the non-small cell lung cancer space. This is a study that I'm the SWOG chair for, and Dr. Chuck Simone is the NRG chair for, and we're looking at the addition of neoadjuvant, concurrent, and adjuvant atezo in early stage medically inoperable non-small cell lung cancer. We did recently have an amendment go through that helps broaden the eligibility a little bit. We're now allowing multifocal tumors, and we've tried to liberalize some of the eligibility around pulmonary function and so forth. If you have any questions about that study, this study, please reach out to me, and we're certainly still hoping to get more sites on board. In the non-small cell space, we also have Dr. Ajmalali's trial, S1933. This is a trial open to inoperable stage 2 and 3 non-small cell lung cancer patients with borderline performance status, either ECOG-2 in the ZUBROD-2 in the stage 3 setting or ZUBROD 1 or 2 in the stage 2 setting, looking at hypofractionated radiation with atezo. And they are a little past the halfway point on accrual, but they would love to get this study wrapped up. Since we didn't have a surgical update, I also wanted to mention Ray O's trial, S1934, NASIST. This is looking at the important clinical area of superior sulcus tumors, where SWOG really has a long track record, looking at the addition of atezo to neoadjuvant chemoradiation. They have not yet accrued any patients, so really would love to get a patient on this trial, especially if you're a high volume surgical site that could potentially open this trial, please consider it. And then to touch on our SWOG endorsed trials, NRG LU002 is currently on interim analysis. Dan Gomez is our SWOG champion. This is a trial looking at consolidative radiation in oligometastatic non-small cell lung cancer. It hopefully will be reopening relatively soon. Another SWOG endorsed trial is NRG LU007. Henry Park is our SWOG champion for this trial. This is a RAPTOR study looking at the addition of consolidative radiation in extensive stage small cell lung cancer. So a very important clinical question. And as the slide notes here, this trial does allow co-enrollment with Maverick, so this should not prevent you from enrolling patients on Maverick at the same time. And then finally, EA 5181, Dr. Matt Harkenreiter is our SWOG champion. This is looking at the addition of concurrent in addition to the Pacific regimen in stage 3 non-small cell lung cancer. So a very pragmatic question, something that I think a lot of people have been interested in. This study is accruing nicely and will probably only be open another year or so because they're well past the halfway point. But this is also a study we're glad to see moving along well. And then finally, the Alliance trial, Dr. Arya Amini is our SWOG champion, and this is looking at the addition of SBRT to standard of care systemic immunotherapy plus minus chemo and PD-L1 negative non-small cell lung cancer. This just opened at the end of 2021, so it's less than a year old, and we're hoping to see this do well. And then finally, NRG LU006 in the IMPRINT trial in malignant mesothelioma. Robbie Samstein from Mount Sinai is our SWOG champion. This is looking at the addition of pleural IMRT for patients after pleurectomy and decortication. So here's a summary. So you see we do have most of the major spaces either have a SWOG study or have a SWOG endorsed study across both non-small cell and small cell. There are still a few spaces open that we're talking about developing trials and had some great discussions this morning about possible trials to fill in some of those spaces. But overall, we do have a nice radiation portfolio. All right.
Thank you, Dr. Daly. That's really, I want to go back to that last slide. And, I think just listening to her presentation, you can see that this is a very active group. And we appreciate her collaborating very closely with our surgeons and helping to move other initiatives forward. So thank you for all your hard work. Any questions for Dr. Daly? Anything online? I don't see anything online. All right, great. We'll move forward now to the translational medicine team update with Dr. Phil Mack.
Thank you very much. This will be brief. We don't have too much to update. We will be focusing on our translational medicine manuscripts to try and get these completed. There's a number that are in process, some that are getting really close. And others that are just sort of things that we are considering pursuing, such as additional studies associated with the 1403 study of Sarah Goldberg. We actually met earlier today to discuss some of these. 1507 should be very close to being published at this point. The 0819 actually has been published. I'll display that in a second. And then we have, which you may have heard in the previous meetings, if you went to the lung map, a number of lung map TM manuscripts. And these aren't tied specifically, for the most part, to any sub-study, which have their own TM goals. These are sort of more larger analyses that are associated with lung map and all of the massive amounts of data and samples that we've accumulated. And finally, there's our favorite orphaned trial, the 0424, which there has been a draft available, and we're trying to find ways to move that into completion.
Mary, you're hoping there's some data that we still needed on that, or everything's set?
It's in process.
It's in process.
And
it will be for the next 10 years.
But maybe people don't know.
What is 0424? That means it's from 04. That means it's from 18 years ago?
Yes, so
I wasn't even born.
we are letting this data mature as long as it can possibly. 0424 was a sort of a molecular analysis of smoking and gender in early stage lung cancer, where we conducted massive amounts of questionnaires to collect a lot of women's health information and smoking background. And it was, at the time, we thought a seminal study, and there's been at least one publication on it, but we struggled to get the final manuscript out for reasons that Mary will explain. Because I don't want to.
Mary doesn't feel compelled to explain.
That are unexplainable. Okay, so so there's a couple of recent publications that we actually did get out. So very quickly, just in a couple slides, because it's a boring topic and I don't want to take up too much time. We have a very full agenda. I was thinking a little bit recently, based on some of the emails about translational medicine in our clinical trials. We recognize that we all agree that it's extremely important, but putting a TM component into a clinical trial can be one of the largest obstacles for concept development, and can certainly be a delaying factor in getting things done. And CTEP has actually recognized this as well. And part of the problem, why it's been so difficult, is that they really wanted to make sure that the assays that you were doing were well validated, but they went kind of a little over the top of this. And the paperwork was so excessive that even like established companies were struggling to fill it all out. And they realized that this has become too much of a challenge, but they don't necessarily want to compromise on assay quality. So one of the options nowadays, unless you're doing something that is truly integral or integrated, which I highly encourage, is to actually submit an amendment during the trial to add in your cartilids later on, maybe around 75% accrual. And this gives you more time to develop them. But additionally, one of the other factors that makes it a challenge is, and we won't necessarily have to use 0424 as an example, but when you're generating a concept, it may be 3, 4, 5, or 6, or 18 years before you're actually ready to do those correlative analysis. And the technology is going to change during that time. It's actually kind of reached a plateau where things are a little more stable, and there's a lot of reference labs out there that you can use. But nevertheless, the things that we would choose to analyze, the platforms that we would use or suggest today aren't necessarily things that we would use 5 years from now. So it actually gives you a much better temporal relationship between when you're doing the analysis and when your specimens are available. So all in all, it's a good thing. But there is one caveat, and that is if you're doing blood collections, you actually, unfortunately, will have to put a lot of thought of that into the actual protocol. Unless you're just doing baseline, if you're going to do serial collection of blood, you need to obviously do that in a planned fashion so that you make sure you get the right specimens. There's a lot of things that need to be considered here. You don't even actually need to know the assay that you're going to do, or even have worked out with a company to do it with, or an academic lab. But nevertheless, you still have to collect the specimens in a way that will be useful to you down the road when you go to do that analysis, if you're not doing it in real time. For instance, where is it being shipped to? Is it going to be banked at the SWOG bank at Nationwide, or is it going to a reference lab? Is it going to be done in real time or not? What on-site procedures are needed to be done at the sites? What are the long-term storage conditions? What types of cell products do you need? Are they going to be pre-made kits? There's a lot of details, and that's unfortunate, but they need to be addressed because obviously, I think collectively and individually, we're very interested in ctDNA dynamics and other sort of monitoring systems. So that's just so when you go to consider how to build the ctDNA or any type of blood analysis in, you're going to have to give those some thoughts. And if you're not really sure, but you want to collect it, I can put this forward as sort of a default option. Streck tubes are much easier than EDTA, much easier on the CRCs and nurses. It transfers the processing requirements onto the bank or whatever reference lab. I would recommend, if you're not really sure and you don't have a good plan in your trial, to get a baseline, some sort of early on treatment, and an at progression draw, but more is more welcome if you can find the funding to it. If you're doing the Streck tubes, you can ship them to Nationwide, and they will isolate the plasma, aliquot it, and freeze it, and it's good for years. One thing I should mention, though, if you were planning on working with a company, whatever your favorite company is, you're going to kind of take them out of their regular, if they have, say, an FDA-approved system, you're not going to be doing that this way. So they have to use their kits, and those kits have to be sent in by mail following their procedure and done in a real time. So if you're banking stuff, it doesn't mean that a reference lab or a company won't do it. They certainly will, but it's not going to be using their approved methodology. And you may have to negotiate with that, say how much blood they'll want that sort of thing. And then you've got to remember to submit your protocol modification before the trial is complete, because if it times out, any specimens that are collected default to becoming property of CTEP, and you as the investigator won't necessarily have control over them. And that concludes my comments for today. Any
Doesn't go on, it's it works.
It's on. So
Questions?
great presentation. I think,
Let's just-
if, you know, I spoke to Yvonne earlier today, and if you could talk to the team about, a little bit about your partnership that you have with the SWOG Bank and how that works.
How does the SWOG Bank actually work?
And, yeah, and how it interacts with the committee and the TM committee in particular.
Yeah, and so basically, let's say you're doing something similar to what's on the slide here, or something completely different, whatever you want. You'll need to alert SWOG Bank if they are going to be the recipients of the specimens, and if they're going to have to do some processing. And the additional factor here, of course, is that you'll have to identify some sort of funding, because they can't necessarily do it for free, although some of it they can, depending on the type of clinical trial. I think one caveat, for instance, this is a very simple collection procedure that I've outlined here, and it's suitable for ctDNA and you know, maybe some proteomics from the plasma. If you wanted to collect viable cells, which a lot of us want to do right now for IO studies, that is a lot more labor intensive. I mean, it's hours actually for each sample to collect that, and it costs a lot of money. The bank will actually do it, but you need to alert them ahead of time and have it written very carefully into the protocol. Any additional things that and they're actually if you can get a hold of them, they're very helpful and very useful, and they will keep your specimens safe for you. The other thing is you may want to have things, if you're doing it in real time, it may need to be shipped directly to a reference lab. The default is to use a SWOG bank, but in many cases, you might, like this has to be analyzed in a couple of days. There's a time limit to it, then you're sending it to a reference lab. Those need to be worked out in exquisite detail. And the bank can do additional things. For instance, they can harvest the plasma for you and save it. But they can also extract the DNA for you, that sort of thing. You can negotiate that as well.
And then I just had, that's fantastic. Is there any potential funding as you talk about the IO correlative studies through CMAC or something else that they can explore beyond their partnerships with the NCI and the industry?
Yeah,
It's
the
complicated.
rules change a lot. CMAC, I don't think is,
It's complicated.
The
that's
Hope
answer.
Foundation may be an option, but you won't be able to get BIQ funding unless you actually have a full-blown integrated or integral study. So what is best is to negotiate with the pharma company that you're working with to get a little funding for this, and talk to the bank about that.
Sounds great. And call Phil, right?
Call me.
But, really, I think the point here also of having.
I don't have any money, so don't call me about that.
Roy has a lot of money, so
Call
if you
Roy.
need money, call Roy. If you want translational medicine, call Phil. But the point of having them, but call Phil, honestly, if you're developing protocols, if you're thinking about developing protocols, call them early, I think is the point of making sure that he comes up here and
Not
talks
early
about
in the
all these
morning.
different.
Early in the process.
Early in the process, yes, not early in the morning, noted.
Another thing I should say real quick is that it's pretty typical when you're developing a concept to bring in your own translational medicine person, and that is absolutely perfectly fine. We encourage it, in fact. Please be careful to make sure that whoever you are bringing in actually has some knowledge of clinical trial oncology studies. It's not just a guy who has a lab down near the hall who's very clever, but because he won't know any of the sort of the nuances and the bureaucracy and the technicalities of all this. But I'm happy to help. But I don't have to be your TM person, but I'm here to help.
Oh, that's a great point. Thank you very much. I love this algorithm here, and I know this is something that we've tried to implement within LungMap and trying to, I think it would be great if we can standardize this across the upcoming and future lung trials. Obviously, we're going to have to think about this, and maybe, Phil, next time we can talk about for earlier stage lung cancer, and we're looking at like MRD, what do you think would be the optimal time points to collect for those? We don't have to talk about it now, but just maybe next time, and in those earlier stage programs. Perfect. Okay, sounds great. Thank you. Okay, wonderful. So I'm going to invite up Dr. Paul Hesketh, who's going to talk to us about the community engagement core within the lung committee. Dr. Hesketh?
Okay, thanks, Janelle. Hello, everybody. So the Community Engagement Subcommittee has remained quite active, and I'll give a very brief update just to keep you abreast of what we're doing. So just to remind people again, this was created a few years ago, really to try to serve as a source of support for the lung committee by reaching out to community-based oncologists that are members of the lung committee. And so really we're responsible to try to be involved in the protocol development process from the very beginning, reviewing trial designs, providing input. I think very, very importantly, trying to identify if there are potential barriers in the real world in terms of those protocol completion. And once the trials are approved, then we're there to try to champion those trials within the community network. We actually have very productive monthly calls that continue. And very nicely, we had an in-person meeting for the first time in 3 years yesterday. So it was nice to be able to get together with a group. So we also participate in accrual enhancement efforts. So we have a small but very, very dedicated committee, and Mariah Norman is our SWOG staff support person. And we also, about a year and a half ago, extended our reach by developing a lung community oncology support group. And these individuals participate in our monthly calls, provide really valuable input, and they really serve to provide feedback on the trials and the questions that we have relating to accrual. So we have a number of ongoing activities. As I mentioned, we're involved really in every step of protocol development, from the time of submission to triage to submission to CTEP, during the development process, very importantly, and during activation. And then, very importantly, we don't forget about the study once it's active. We need to be involved in any of the accrual enhancement activities that are ongoing. And I think, again, hopefully what we can do is really provide real-world feedback throughout the life of the study. As I mentioned, we have monthly meetings, which we do in collaboration with the Lung Community Oncology Support Group. And we introduced recently, the last few meetings, a new concept, which was to actually invite specific study PIs to actually participate. And so it's actually been really great because we got a mutual dialogue going where we're able to provide feedback to the PIs in terms of their studies, in terms of some of the challenges that perhaps are being realized. And I think for the members of our group, it's also useful to get the perspective from the PI if there is some misunderstanding about the protocol or some aspect of it that isn't really understood. So having that dialogue directly with the study PIs, I think, has been very helpful. We also continue with an extraordinarily helpful partnership with the MedNet. I'll have a couple of slides shortly to talk about that, but that's been a very, very successful collaboration. And then most recently, we've started to get involved in the Lung Committee's DEI initiative. So in terms of the MedNet, I hope that most people here are familiar with this digital platform. It's really a tremendous tool that allows a way to really look at clinical questions, get input from experts, and then sort of discuss it in real time on the net. And we have really worked with the MedNet to try to use this platform to highlight SWOG lung trials and to basically educate a very broad community. As you can see, over 13,000 people participate in this on a regular basis. educate them, and very importantly, get real-world feedback in a very rapid fashion. So these are some of the activities that we've been doing with the MedNet. We've had an outreach effort to the NCORE sites to basically try to get them aware of this tool, to get them to utilize the tool so that they then can basically be aware in another forum about the lung studies that we're promoting. We've used this tool to really highlight key trials such as S1827, S1914, the Insignia trial, and then most recently, Rayo's trial looking at superior sulcus S1934. I think it's been, again, an incredibly useful way to get real-time feedback. They have surveys that they're conducting, and again, you know how difficult it can be to get responses. Literally, you will have responses from hundreds and hundreds of folks, and it's really valuable information to give you information about, what folks in the community are thinking about particular trials and perhaps why they're having accrual issues. And then most recently, a really neat tool that they have on the MedNet is actually having journal clubs. And most recently, they had a journal club on Karen Reckhamp's trial, the S1800A, which again is a very exciting study that we'll hear more about, but basically was presented at ASCO and simultaneously published in JCO. And again, another forum to get that information out there into the community. So most recently, we've got involved in the Lung Committee's DEI initiative. We're going to hear more about that today in our meeting. But this is a multi-year initiative to try to improve diversity, equity, and inclusion throughout our clinical trial portfolio. And our initial effort in this regard, being helped by our DEI champion, Lucy Gansauer, who's been very, very helpful, is to try to look at analytic incident clinical cancer cases and our trial accrual information by site, broken down by race and ethnicity. And by looking at that information, hopefully we'll get an idea of how we're doing right now, and then perhaps have a way to set goals for the future. We also hope that we can use this to collect best practices from the different sites in terms of successful programs that have actually enhanced their underserved population accrual. So we're very excited about this effort, and we will continue with these efforts. And just a couple of slides. This is basically the format of the data form that we use to collect this information. Again, I remain available for anyone that's interested in what we're doing. If there are folks that are interested in perhaps becoming part of that lung oncology support group, please, you see my email there, very simple. Feel free to reach out, because we certainly would like to widen our reach as much as possible.
That's great. Thank you so very much, Paul. And thank you for all of your help and your support with those individuals on their clinical trials and getting them to the community sites. I think there's one good thing, right? I think there's many good things to the virtual environment, but one is that we can certainly feel a little bit more connected, maybe in a different way, but it certainly makes touching and having touch points with those local sites, the community providers, the community staff, it makes it, I think, a little bit easier for all of us. So thank you for all your work.
Sure, thank you.
All right, I don't see any questions, anyone coming to the podium or anything in the chat. So we'll next go on to our DEI champion, Lucy. Really wonderful to have her. And I just want to kind of set the stage for this because I think some of you heard her talk on some of the committee meetings, the committee meeting before. So the NCI has charged the cooperative groups with coming up with DEI efforts, and what SWOG, they each have to come up with 5 groups that they're going to partner with on DEI efforts, and within SWOG, the lung group was chosen to work in this area. And with that, we have a SWOG fellow, Dr. Patricia Robinson, who will be giving us our keynote in a little bit, one of our keynotes, as well as we have our own lung committee DEI champion in Lucy, who's been just dove right into this and has really been doing fantastic work. And as you can hear from others, such as Paul, that she's very collaborative and working in partnership. So with that, Lucy.
Thank you. Well, I'm very fortunate to have been chosen to work with the Lung Committee because they have been outstanding to welcome me and have been doing a lot of this work in the past anyway, so this really meshed in with a lot of the goals the Lung Committee has already had. My job is just to further support them in achieving their goals around making sure that trials are representative. One of the first things that Dr. Gray did was form a subcommittee so that I could get input and support in doing this work. And as you can see, this is just loaded with a lot of people that can be extremely beneficial to pushing this work forward. One of the things that I really thought about was the fact that trial accruals are all local. So my efforts here aren't going to be as valuable as they would at the local level. So I've been working with Paul's committee to try to engage at the local level, and Paul talked about some of that, and I'll go in more detail. I'm also working with advocacy groups, as Judy is as well. Dr. Gray has challenged us all to try to get more involved with those. So we're giving a talk on November 1st at the GO2 meeting on DEI and kind of using LungMap as an example of that. But as you can see, and I think was at the plenary, is the Lung Committee overall has been doing well compared to a lot of the other NCTN groups. And LungMap particularly has been doing well in diversity. But the Lung Committee wants to continue to ensure that there's representativeness. The diversity gap that we see is particularly around African Americans, Native Americans, and Hispanics. But when you look at, I'm using one example of a site that I visited. When you look at their accruals, and I looked at their demographics as they compared to national, you can see that their demographics for African Americans are 16.3. This is in Anderson in South Carolina. So when you look at their accruals were very good and compared to national demographics, but when they compare it to their catchment area, their demographics don't look as well. So there's room in Anderson. If that was any other site, that may be a very excellent. So you really have to look at your analytical cases or your catchment area and see how you're serving those populations. And it's going to require intentionality at every site to identify what are the barriers in your community that perhaps are leaving some patients behind and not being able to access these novel trials. So the project is really just simply looking at your accruals, what is the race and ethnicity of those, matching that to your analytical cases, or you could use your catchment area if you prefer, and see if you are representative of where you're supposed to be serving your patients. And then you can identify a goal to meet. Most of the time, just sharing that information with your clinical research group and your team, that awareness really starts moving that needle with no other effort. And when a couple years ago, we were working and we had quite a big gap on meeting the AYA population. And even our AYA physician felt our goal was too challenging. And not only did we reach it, a couple quarters, we would even exceed it. So, and we didn't do any real special efforts. It's just being aware and making sure and talking about it, making sure you have trials for like AYA population. So we have to make our trials inclusive when we develop them for populations, and then just have an awareness intentionality. This is a simple goal. We will be sending this out again. Paul has sent it out several times. We have it both in a table format or Excel format. I'm available to help. And this is just to see how your accruals are overall The second table is just to really tell you how well your lung program is working. So you're looking at your analytical cases and you're kind of comparing those both on race and ethnicity, but also on your clinical trial percentages to see how those are going. And I think at any site, it's good to look at your analytical cases and to see what your percentages are. So do you have enough trials open for those? So this would tell you a good insight into your lung program. But this is really work that has to be done at the local level. Local teams need to set goals and need to look at their own individual populations and barriers. If it's a rural area, there may be transportation barriers. Inner city area, it may be parking. But what can we do to work with navigators and other resources to try to eliminate those? And thank you. I really appreciate the warm welcome I've had in this new job. Thank you.
Really great, Lucy. I think you had, in one of the other sessions, right, you had given us an example of a site where you went there, or you went there, or you were able to visit, and this was, I believe, in partnership with LungMap. But
Yes.
I think it serves as an example of the ability and what your team can do and how you kind of deploy that information from lessons learned. So maybe I thought you could share a little bit of that here.
Well, I went to visit Anderson because they're number 9 in the nation for lung map accruals. And Anderson and Med Hospital is a very small facility, has 9 medical oncologists, 2 radiation oncologists, and they're number 9. I thought, I've got to go there and talk to them. And they happen to have kind of all the magic ingredients to make a perfect setting. They're in one building, their doctors and radiation oncologists are all there. The research staff is there. The research manager, even though she's only half-time, has got about 20 years experience in research, and she also does data management. So she's got the data, she's enthusiastic. The research nurse that's in charge of LungMap, she has 11 years experience. And I know lack of experience and turnover has been a real problem. That's not one they're facing. And then the other thing that was really important, I thought this would be a kind of a simple meeting of a couple people and chatting. They rolled out their hospital administrator, the cancer center director, Dr. Nadak came down at a clinic and met with me and took pictures. And this just shows how much leadership is behind this small clinical research department in a small community of Anderson, South Carolina. And they were immediately, we talked about DEI, I looked at their percentage, where I told you they had 13% African Americans, and she's going to go back and try to identify why she thought some of those didn't go on. And going forward, she's going to communicate those with me. I plan to do other visits. I've identified several other sites to go in person because I don't think there's anything like being on site, talking to the staff that are really doing this work to really understand what's going on.
That's fantastic. And Mary, what do you think about maybe inviting some of these sites that are excelling in accruals to come and give highlights and give a talk potentially?
I think it's always nice to encourage and engage sites so that we can learn from each other. So we just have to figure out obviously logistics and costs and that kind of stuff. But yeah, I think we should all learn from each other.
Yeah, maybe we can, that's a good point. Maybe we can even leverage the virtual platforms that we have. That's fantastic. Thanks again, Lucy. Thank you. Okay, so just a couple of, before we get to our keynote, couple of things. One is, you heard some great overview of the trials that we have in our pipeline. We have more to come and can't wait to share those with you. But I do want to encourage everybody as we think about the trials that we open and the trials that are presented to us is really think about feasibility, working on getting those trials open at your site so we can really ramp up our accruals. This is something that is watched very closely across all of the cooperative groups. We can talk more about that as we go through each clinical trial. I also wanted to, Dr. Wright is head of our imaging subcommittee, and he wanted me to please mention to you to please remember about our imaging subcommittee. They're happy to partner with you on your clinical trials. You know, again, I encourage you, if you want to partner with them, to reach out to them early in the development of your concept. They have a lot of novel techniques. You know, this is lung cancer. Even if you have early stage lung cancer, if you have later stage lung cancer, regardless, when you look across the clinical trials, that imaging is something that we have to collect the data. And so thinking about using that as a potential precision oncology approach in the future is a way that you can think about partnering with that group. I also want to take a moment to thank Dr. Monica Reyes personally from Moffitt Cancer Center. She's our thoracic oncology research project specialist and has been so instrumental in helping to put together the slides for the disease working group as well as for this lung committee. So could not have done it without her, and want to send her a special thanks. I think she's joining us online. So thank you very much, Dr. Reyes. All right. And with that, I'm going to move to our keynote, our first keynote speaker. So we'll just have her start walking up. So Dr. Robinson is the Assistant Dean of the Stritch School of Medicine of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, and is the Associate Professor at Loyola Medicine. In her role, she serves as a DEI lead for the fellows and residents, as well as faculty program development as it relates to retention and promotion. She received her medical degree from Michigan State University and completed her residency in internal medicine, Loyola University in Chicago, and hematology oncology fellowship training at Fox Chase Cancer Center, Temple University. She returned to Loyola Medical Center as a member of the breast oncology team, specializing in malignant disorders of the breast, as well as directing the cancer survivorship program as mandated by the Commission on Cancer. Her clinical interests include the impact of metabolic syndrome on breast cancer outcomes, health disparities as it relates to treatment options, outcomes, health literacy, and participation in clinical trials. And as I mentioned before, she's our fellow here at the entire SWOG group for DEI, and we really appreciate her taking time to come talk to us at the Lung Committee. Dr. Robinson.
So thank you very much. I appreciate the introduction. Like any proud parent, my father has told me that they have not updated the website and to get on them about doing that. So I can proudly say I'm a full professor and associate dean of the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, and I will get with our IT people on Monday.
Sounds perfect. And congratulations.
Thank you. So thanks for inviting me. I have enjoyed my time being the DEI fellow for SWOG. It's certainly been an eye-opening experience because we have always done such good work in SWOG, but there's always room for improvement. And we recognize that DEI, although it's always been important, it's kind of now a hot topic everywhere, the NCI, cooperative groups, and industry. And so now we're really trying to, I think, fortify and maybe standardize some of the processes within SWOG. So my talk is really back to basics and making diversity matter in clinical trials. So how do we define diversity? And that's important because actually diversity is defined differently based upon the age that you are, the generation that you are in, and probably even where you live in the United States. So we have classically categorized diversity as race and ethnicity. But certainly we need to expand those categories to include age, geography, gender, sexual orientation, gender identification, and physical ability when we think about equity, inclusion, and representativeness in clinical trials. So in terms of the SWOG experience, SWOG has been extraordinarily prolific in publishing their positive outcomes. And so I want to use it as the background and kind of set the foundation as to why diversity is important. Okay, so in total, one study that I found was in total 12,361 patients were enrolled to 23 positive trials from 1965 to 2012. And the study estimated that 3.34 million life years were gained from those 23 trials through 2015. And estimates were greater than 2 million life years gained under most model simulations. And the US dollar return on investment was $125 per year life gained. Patient participation in clinical trials is vital for knowledge advancement and outcomes improvement. A systemic review identified studies from January 2000 to January 2020 that examined clinical trial participation in the United States. More than half of all cancer patients that were offered clinical trials do participate. And that's critical because policies and interventions to improve clinical trial participation should focus more on modifiable systemic structural and clinical barriers, such as improving access to available trials and broadening eligibility criteria. SWOG trials have substantial impact on population survival for patients with cancer over 60 years. And the NCI's investment in its Cancer Cooperative Group Research program has provided exceptional value and benefit to the American public through its research programs, generating positive cancer treatment trials. So when looking at racial diversity, this slide that I borrowed from Melissa Simon, who did a very nice talk at the PAC committee on Tuesday, I believe, nicely illustrates that only about 5% and 1% of clinical trial participants are Black or African American or Hispanic and Latinx, respectively. And that's relative to their 13.4% and 18.1% representation in the United States. This is important because, as we know, the demographics in the United States is rapidly changing. And so we need to be conscientious and intentional about how we think about DEI in our clinical trials. So in specifically looking at the impact in these patient populations, SWOG assessed whether racial disparities in survival existed among patients enrolled in consecutive trials. So they identified 19,457 adult cancer patients who were treated on 35 SWOG randomized clinical trials from October 1974 through November 2001. Patients were grouped according to studies of diseases with similar histology and stage. African American race was associated with increased mortality in sex-specific cancers, including early stage pre- and postmenopausal breast cancer, advanced stage ovarian, and advanced stage prostate cancer. There was no statistically significant association between race and survival for lung, colon, lymphoma, leukemia, or myeloma. And additional adjustments for socioeconomic status did not substantially change these observations. And I would be interested in SWOG updating the data, as there have been significant gains in the breast cancer patient population, to see if we've narrowed that gap. Relative to Hispanic racial disparities, they identified 29,338 patients registered to 38 trials. 5% of them were Hispanic. Hispanics were more likely to be younger and from lower income and educational areas. And there were no differences in survival across tumor types, except in the advanced stage prostate cancer group, where we observed an association between Hispanic ethnicity and worse overall survival, progression-free survival, and cancer-specific survival. I think that this clearly demonstrates that when offered clinical trials, most patients will participate in them, and we can significantly impact equity as well as inclusion, translating into better outcomes for underrepresented patient populations. This is not just SWOG data, we really should consider this our data. When looking at the LGBTQ SOGI patient population, clinical trials are not adequately serving and growing with this LGBTQ plus population. And this lack of inclusion could contribute to health outcome disparities, undermine the efficacy of study data, and slow development of critical drugs and treatments. So this might represent an area of interest within the SWOG organization, and certainly represents an opportunity. So geography is one area of diversity. SWOG conducted comparative effectiveness retrospective cohort analyses, and about 36,000, almost 37,000 patients from all 50 states enrolled in 44 phase 3 and phase 2/3 SWOG trials. Rural and urban patients with uniform access to care through participation in a SWOG clinical trial had similar outcomes, and this finding suggests that improving access to uniform treatment strategies for patients with cancer may help resolve the disparity in cancer outcomes between rural and urban patients. So I want to shift to what the SWOG DEI initiatives have been over the past year and a half, and really a little bit longer than that because many of the initiatives predate me coming on as the DEI fellow. So in terms of project benchmark, this is where we are. The yellow star represents today. And over the course of time, SWOG has been able to develop a field guide, develop methodology, and that's Module 6 at Team Science. They have established the role of a DEI fellow, in which case I've been able to conduct a current state analysis, conducted a SWOG leadership survey. We piloted a project and 5 studies. You are well aware of Lucy and her contribution to the lung committee, but we also have DEI champions in breast, GU, GI, and myeloma. The DEI champions were onboarded and they all selected a study and activities in order to implement DEI. We submitted reports both quarterly and annually. We all attended the SWOG spring meeting and participated actively in various committees. We also contributed to the construction of a monitoring committee, the DEI monitoring committee. They were onboarded. And then most recently was the selection of a vice chair DEII. Yeah, and I'm not sure if he's still in the room, but Don Dizon is our new vice chair of DEII. And we're all looking forward to his contribution in moving the needle forward in this DEI space. Okay, so who are the participants? As I mentioned, the DEI fellow, the DEI champions, the DEI monitor committee, but we do have allies in the retention and recruitment committee, as well as the patient advocate committee, and then the vice chair DEII. When looking at the DEI drivers, so in the center, the importance is the excellence in cancer research and eliminating health disparities. So that means creating an inclusive climate. That is not just for the members of our organization, but also creating a climate in which our patient populations feel comfortable and feel trusted in participating in clinical trials. Equitable opportunities. That too not only means delivery of care, but that represents or means equitable opportunities within the SWOG organization for its members and leadership. Sustainable partnerships. We should be thinking about who our allies are, who our partners are within the community space and within other communities that we can collaborate with in a sustainable way to continue to move the needle in the DEI realm. Innovative care of delivery models, and sometimes that means you have to think outside of the box, and maybe what we've been doing for the past 40 years, the past 20 years, is not necessarily what we should be doing now. So thinking innovatively and with intentionality about how to increase representativeness in clinical trials. Culturally responsive care. So I'm sure that many of us are used to the term and probably can't divine what cultural competency really means when delivery of care. However, culturally responsive is probably the newest term and probably more meaningful in terms of how we think about our patient populations and engage with them. And then representational diversity. And that too is not just within the clinical trial space and who participates in clinical trials, but within the space in which we operate for SWOG, the organization. So inclusive community building, advocacy, and engagement is kind of one theme. And so I would like to say that we conducted a leadership survey, and we have a lot of support from SWOG leadership. The majority of SWOG leadership strongly agrees that diversity is an asset at 68%. The majority of SWOG leadership agrees that they have a role to champion DEI within their committees, at 72%. Less than a quarter of SWOG leadership strongly agree that there are sufficient opportunities for committee members to provide DEI input across the clinical trial cycle at 21%. And approximately 1/3 of SWOG leadership strongly agree that SWOG actively manages diversity and representativeness. And approximately half of SWOG leadership feels that the level of preparedness to implement DEI processes is excellent or good. So there's definitely room for improvement, but I think the leadership survey demonstrated that we have the support of our leadership, I think from a sweat equity as well as a financial equity perspective. In terms of constituency leadership, who is really important in terms of that leadership team? Well, it's everyone who is involved with the protocol concept development and design. So that means the PI, the committee chair, your statistician, your program manager, your patient advocate, your DEI champion, and last but not least, your members. Because once it leaves the hands of the PI and it goes out to the sites, you all are really doing the grassroots efforts and the hard work in getting patients enrolled on the clinical trials. In terms of education, training, and development, a lot of hard work went into Module 6, and Module 6 is specific to increasing representativeness on clinical trials. But also the champions are really engaged in tool building, and I think Lucy showed you a nice example of one of the tools that they're using for the lung map study. Template development and survey creation. I just want to put this slide up for those of you who have never seen this. This is the methodology. And so it, I think, nicely highlights multiple opportunities in which we can insert diversity, equity, and inclusion into the clinical trial process, including general and overarching. And at the baseline level, that really means advocating for diversity and representativeness and analyzing portfolio and identifying gaps. So are there some study questions that are not even being asked relative to diversity or our patient population in the United States, and starting there? Next would be developing preliminary forecasting subpopulations and discussing subpopulation barriers and brainstorming solutions, reviewing the protocol. Interestingly, and maybe difficult to do, would be building funding to bridge the gaps in subpopulations, but it's always worth the ask. And then, of course, reviewing inclusion and exclusion criteria and making sure that we are not inadvertently introducing barriers to underrepresented populations to participating in clinical trials. Study design, reviewing it, preparing for the final forecast, developing accrual plans, selecting and soliciting sites based upon subpopulations. And I really cannot underemphasize that enough. Making sure that we leverage the sites relative to their patient populations to increase the likelihood of representativeness on clinical trials. Implementation, and then sharing. And sharing is, once we have all this data, making sure that we are transparent as well as intentional about effective communication of our trial results. And I guess I should probably throw in there timeliness. I think that's key too, the timeliness of the clinical trial results. Okay, outreach, recruitment, and retention. So in terms of patient recruitment strategies and development for research institutions, so that would be the sites, thinking about study team training, making sure everybody at the site is at least aware, educated, and well-versed on how to increase representativeness on clinical trials. Patient education and awareness, making sure that your consumers, your patients, are educated and aware of what you have available at your institution. Understanding the patient population, not just the patients who are engaged in utilizing your cancer center, but the patients that represent your catchment area, so your regional patient population. As we all know, that hospitals are oftentimes located in minority communities, but they are not necessarily the patients that utilize the academic center hospitals. And so I think it would be an interesting exercise for our sites to compare and contrast exactly who are the patients that they are serving relative to their catchment area, because that becomes a gap. Community engagement and partnerships, this too is critical, especially when you are dealing with patient populations where there may not be a lot of trust. They may not come into the clinic visit and immediately embrace the message being delivered by the physician, but if their primary care doctor or the community advocate, somebody that they are familiar with, somebody that they trust, endorses the concept of clinical trials. So those are organizations, advocacy groups, or people that we need to be engaging with in terms of community partners. Site navigators, and I do want to contextualize this in the sense that it's a resource that the site should look into, but certainly a lot of hand-holding and shepherding almost underrepresented patient populations through the clinical trial process. Tracking progress, and then a communication plan. And I think that is bidirectional. That is patient, site, community partner, site, SWOG, site. So I just want to highlight some of the current DEI champion activities. As mentioned, there are 5 champions, and they are not all working on the same activities. They had the opportunity to select a study, meet with their committee chair, and then select some activities relative to their clinical trial that they thought would be interesting or innovative. So they are looking at demographic site analyses and participating prior study activation. They're looking at statistical design and study development, early stratum closure, which is not something we have historically done at SWOG, but other cooperative groups have done in order to increase representativeness in their clinical trials. Establishing a DEI subcommittee within that committee in collaboration with the statistician to request an expanded accrual report. Monitoring for accrual barriers, developing DEI worksheet projects, and demographic questionnaires with patient advocates and LGBTQ researchers to ensure appropriate and inclusivity, as well as identifying missed opportunities and addressing countermeasures, designing culturally appropriate accrual plans for recruitment of veterans and people of color to studies, demographic site analyses. I'm sorry, I think I mentioned that one already. Yep. Okay, and then dropping down, quarterly reviews of current enrollments and study dropouts by race, ethnicity, and categories. So opportunities in year 2. I am in the second year of my DEI fellowship, so some opportunities that were identified during our year 1 analysis and data collection would be increasing DEI reporting, forecast accountability, and as many of you know, as part of the protocol design, we are responsible to include a forecast and project our accruals, but at the closure of the study, there's no accountability in terms of whether or not those measures were met. So increasing accountability, methodology standardization into study team processes, resource creation, and then SWOG DEI collaboration, including the fellow, champions, the monitoring committee, ally committees, and then the vice chair DEII, and then community partner development. And then, as mentioned before, tool development, which I think will be really interesting. I think people are interested and they're engaged in the process, but may not necessarily know how to do it. So perhaps some of the tools and resources would be useful at the site level. And that would be helping to record institutional patient population, enrollment, cancer program disease incidents, enrollment strengths and weaknesses, gaps in enrollment, identifying catchment areas to assess discordance between communities, to capture physician and patient experience, and to train study teams on cultural competence. In terms of community engagement, what makes effective community engagement? Well, that means capability. So member institutions being ready and able to execute the recruitment plan, communication, increasing, as well as strategizing the communication, a commitment, mutual benefit to the community as well as the institution beyond self-interest. And I think that lends itself to the trust questions. Minority patients don't just want to feel like that they are a guinea pig or that you are engaging them in your institution just to get them on a clinical trial. And then contribution, members and institution create an environment that fosters engagement. So the patient is the center of this Venn diagram, but certainly it is the work effort and collaboration between the site, SWOG, and then our community partners. Institutional excellence, data and outcome monitoring, and that needs to be at the organization level as well as the site level. So Catherine Guthrie was very nice to construct some tables for us, and she did it for every committee that's within SWOG. And so certainly right now she was helping us just kind of understand our data, and so we have to work through the not the sustainability, but I would say the upkeep and the maintenance of this, right? Because as data emerges, who's going to keep this up to date? But basically, she was able to construct for us by ethnicity and race, gender, and then age. And then one can see across 29 studies within the lung portfolio, the percentages. I think by having the data, you all can look and see, okay, these are some of our obvious gaps, these are areas or opportunities. And without having access to this, the questions may never be generated. So this would be at the organization level. And I wanted to share with you this, that another cooperative group actually has a DEI dashboard at the site level. And so basically, every site can go into their portal if you are a member and access by age, race, gender, what your accruals have been at that institution. And then they provide nicely a bar graph broken down by if you want it by race, if you want it by age, if you want it by gender. So again, it gives you a snapshot as to what your institution is doing. And I think this would be a really exciting and nice dashboard for SWOG to construct. In terms of sustainability, sustainability of this DEI program, for me, includes development of the community partners and relationships, robust and timely data collection and dissemination, addressing countermeasures, so really taking the opportunity halfway through accrual of the clinical trial, or whatever time point is appropriate. What are we doing right and what are we doing wrong? And let's recalibrate. There's no point in waiting until the end of the clinical trial to say, this was a missed opportunity. Increasing, of course, representation in SWOG clinical trials, and then improving communication. But relative to sustainability, I just want to kind of throw this out there to you. Diversity is not a destination, it's a journey. So the DEI efforts within SWOG do not end because we meet the benchmark of a certain percentage of underrepresented being enrolled in clinical trials. This is really something that should be woven into the fabric of everything that we do. And then lastly, in terms of opportunities, leadership in the team, just really prioritizing DEI and all that that means. And again, going beyond the traditional categories and really expanding it, because the goal is to not just increase representatives, it's to bring health equity and inclusion. Increasing diversity at all levels within SWOG, so that's leadership, our scientists, the clinicians, members, and I would say leadership programs. Being intentional and strategic about what we do, having search committees when we're trying to establish leadership roles, having holistic interviewing and resume reviews, pathways to leadership, making sure you're really nurturing your junior members, and then just keeping in mind that pathways are important in key areas in concentration and our focus. So I think that's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Fantastic job. We'll open up the floor to questions. If I could, while we're waiting for people to come to the microphone, I'm curious if you could talk, you have a lot of the SWOG committee members here. We have staff, we have providers, researchers, we have industry in the room. And I'm curious within SWOG itself, if there's maybe one thing you could tell us that we should focus on. Is there one thing at a committee level? Is there one thing at an individual level? Is there one thing at like an industry level, given the individuals in this room?
Okay, great question. And no, I don't think there's one thing that I could tell you.
Not easy.
Yeah, but it is very layered. But I really do respect the fact that there are multiple opportunities in which we can plug in processes to increase representativeness. So one thing I would suggest is we actually almost develop a heat map, and that is finding out where our communities live so that we have appropriate site engagement. So if you have a disease in which X percentage of the patients, X percentage of the incidence is African Americans. So I'm going to make up some numbers. Let's just say disease X is seen in 25% of African Americans. But all of the sites who are participating in that clinical trial have a minority patient population that's less than 10%. You're never going to get to that benchmark because there's a discordance between the patient population and the site in which it's open. So I think really being intentional about the sites that are participating in clinical trials, looking at your portfolios, making sure that the disease is represented relative to your patient population would increase the likelihood.
If you don't look, you won't find, right? So what I'm hearing is that we need to, one of the things that I think we can all do is raise our awareness to this and be more intentional about our efforts. Great point. And you have to look in the right places.
You do have to look in
there,
absolutely. Right, and it's a two-way street, right? So one would argue that the same thing is true of melanoma.
Yeah.
Right? So we really cannot be caught in these traditional definitions of diversity, right? It's really diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Across all the pillars. Dr. Dizon.
Yeah, so, I would just want to say, probably this is the first time I've met a fellow who has actually done more to teach than we've had to teach her. So thank you very much for joining SWOG in this role. And I think I look forward to collaborating with you greatly. Based on what was just shared, I would actually challenge the lung committee to think about ways we construct the language of our clinical trials. I oftentimes will not think about forecasts of who's going to enter my trial until I get to the point of writing that part of a trial. When I get to the statistics, that's when I think, okay, well, what do I think? What have we done in the past? That informs what I'm going to put in my protocol. I would suggest that one of the very easiest things we could do when we describe the disease burden, which is usually one of the first 3 paragraphs in our protocols, we go beyond the cancer statistics we all cite, which is this many people in the United States get lung cancer and this many people die of lung cancer each year. I would encourage us to do the deep dive. And of that, 50% of people in the Black communities are impacted. This proportion in the Asian communities are impacted, and this proportion is impacted. And have that help guide your statistics on what you're forecasting, because then it will lend you the ability to do a closure of a particular group once it's met. And then you can do more intentional enrollments. The second thing I would say is that I think we've done great work at SWOG. Think about when you're writing up your protocols and your trials come short. Say you have enrolled 95% white people in your phase 3 trial. Bring it up as a limitation in the discussion. Don't wait for the reviewers to call it out, because that is one other way we can demonstrate that we are committed to these principles of DEI.
Thank you. Those are great, really great suggestions. And I'll just say, I know that Mary Redmond works very closely with a lot of our PIs. We all have to fill out those accrual enrollment tables also as part of our forecasting. And I've certainly seen her reject some and send us back to the drawing board. So I appreciate her keeping us honest. And hopefully with our second keynote speaker, to your point about protocol language and what we can do to reach more diverse patient populations with our clinical trials. Hopefully we'll hear some information from Dr. Redkamp that we think is really cutting edge on how we're leading that way in the lung committee at SWOG. Thank you.
I'm Jeff Merenberg. I have a question for you. As we move more and more towards personalized medicine, we heard in the plenary and what we're doing, do you think there's any tendency to worsen the accrual of certain elements, certain minorities, and certain underserved? Because I'm just guessing that there might be a disparity that's increasing because of this. I'm wondering, when you looked at the trials, if you could separate out those trials from the general trials to see if there's any less accrual of certain populations.
Oh, okay. So if I am understanding your question correctly, is there a difference between our more traditional clinical trials and then the ones that are looking at precision medicine?
Correct.
Okay, so I don't know the answer to that question. Yeah, and I think that's part of data collection. But to that note, I would say that is, for me, even more rationale to increase our representativeness in clinical trials to understand the differences in tumor biologies. I think that's one of the limitations when you try to analyze studies that come from more homogeneous populations. That's certainly one of the limitations when you don't, even within our heterogeneous US population, interpreting the data or the applicability of the data. But even if you just got patients to a level of enrollment for biomarkers alone, that would be a win, right? The drug would be another level. But just getting to the biomarker and understanding differences in biologies would be critical.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's a nice plug there for LungMap also, right? Where we provide the biomarker testing for the patients free of charge. And so do encourage you to think about that. And, you know, if you look at data that came out as recently as ASCO also, to Dr. Robinson's point, when we look at this, that Black patients are less likely to undergo molecular testing when they're diagnosed with lung cancer, and they're less likely to undergo NGS, so broad-based panel testing also. It's very significant differences there, so good point. Right?
Yeah, and so I just want to make maybe 2 or 3 points. One is, first of all, that SWOG has authority in this space. Some of the original work that clearly established the overwhelming structural nature of the barrier to access was done by SWOG. Don Hirschman, Joe Hunger, and co. So that body of work is rich, it's homegrown, and anybody who's not familiar with it, I would strongly urge them to read it. We can all learn from that. So where the barriers are, even though the consequences are at the person level, and so we naturally make the error of looking at the person and somehow imagining that there's some problem with them that makes them not want to gain access to clinical trials. It is actually us, not them. It is the way we design our clinical trials, whether or not we have infrastructure to provide access to clinical trials in the places where people go to seek care. So how can we overcome that? Well, it's not just about looking, it's also where we are looking. We need to design clinical trials that are feasible in places where patients that we seek gain access to, but we also need to bring the people in these communities, investigators, clinicians, nurses, and so on, invite them into our house. So right from the beginning, they're able to tell us what works and what doesn't work for them. So if we're truly interested, we will then show the good faith effort to make things easier for them to participate. And then the third part is the workforce. Yes. Our workforce in SWOG and out in the field where the work is done needs to reflect the people we're looking for, right? So this is a challenge that our senior most leadership has taken to heart, which is why we have this huge new effort that we're making with Hope Foundation funding to create an organization that truly does what it says it wants to do, which is create access to the full spectrum of people in the United States with cancer.
Thank you very much, Ray. Great points. And thank you to Dr. Robinson. We really appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedule to come be with us today.
Thank you
and
very
for all
much.
of your excellent work. I look forward to seeing the fruits of your labor and your partnership with Lucy as well as this committee. So we also have Dr. Gantoro, who's going to be talking to us about a new clinical trial that she worked in partnership, speaking of Dr. Hirschman and her committee. I believe, Dr. Gantoro, you're joining us virtually?
That's right. Thank you
Absolutely.
very
Then-
much, Dr. Gray.
All right, great. Just tell me next, and I'll move the slide forward for you.
Okay, thank you. So first of all, congratulations to the Lung Map and the Lung Committee for the wonderful work in the last decade and many more to come. Kudos. Next slide, please. So we're becoming more and more aware and educated about what the efficacy of these immune checkpoint inhibitors with all these keynotes, checkmates, IM, everything. What we don't have much prospective data is on how these IRAs develop and who are the patients and people that are at risk for developing these IRAs, immune-related adverse events. So recently, I've been treating many of my patients with immune checkpoint inhibitors, and there is a 60-year-old, very robust, one of my patients. We've been giving her adjuvant immunotherapy, immune checkpoint inhibitors. She does not have any medical history or family history of any autoimmune diseases, and she's not on any medications. So after the third dose, she came back in a wheelchair. Daughter brought her in a wheelchair, and she's been having fatigue and being very thirsty and urinating a lot. I knew something was wrong when I saw her in the wheelchair and how she looked. And then my pager goes off. Her blood sugar was 700. She developed type 1 diabetes with 3 doses of immune checkpoint inhibitor. I wish I had a tool to see who would be at risk to develop these IRAEs. Then maybe I would be able to figure out whether the risk and benefit ratio, or look at like how I can surveil more. So that is the desire behind this iCheckIt or S2013. As you can see in the schema, which I'll go in detail a little bit further. Next slide, please. So the primary objective of this iCheckIt study is to develop and validate in the same study a risk prediction model for grade 3 or higher non-hematological IRAEs. So patients who are receiving immune checkpoint inhibitors for solid tumors in their first year of therapy would be eligible. Next slide, please. We're not only looking at the grade 3 or higher toxicities, which most of the clinical trials report. We're looking at the low-grade toxicities and what is the burden of this on our quality of life for our patients. We're looking at the patient-reported outcomes and how this is affecting them, not just by the CTCAE grades that we report. Next slide, please. So our accrual goal with this study is 2,062 patients. To date, we have 463 patients that are enrolled onto the study, and half of them had baseline tissue submission. And all of these NCORE sites and other institutions have been contributing, and thank you very much for that. Next slide, please. So this is the study calendar. So the eligible criteria is mainly if their oncologists are going to give them immune checkpoint inhibitors as a monotherapy or in combination with another ICI, then they would be eligible to go on the study. This is the real world data that we're looking for so that we can help in clinic. So initial time when they come in, when they register, they undergo initial evaluation, they fill out CTCAE grading and also PRO data. We request at that time to get a tissue if it is that they do not have to undergo new biopsy. Archival tissue is good. And we also get a blood sample at that time. Then they would go on to the study as a standard of care. And at 4 time points, week 4, 12, 24 and 52, they would be undergoing these PROs and also the regular workup by their treating physician and treating team, along with the blood test. If they develop grade 3 or higher IRAEs, then they would get a blood sample before they start on steroids or other kinds of treatment. And we would also get a PROs at that time. Next slide, please. So we have a translational objective from this study with the blood is to look at the cytokine toxicity score, which is a 11 different cytokine level measure, looking at both prior to ICI-based therapy and after one cycle of therapy as a predictive signature. So let's imagine if we get all of these patients to give the blood and get archival tissue, how much more translational work we can do with all of this, as Dr. Mack mentioned in his plenary presentation yesterday. Next slide, please. So another update from this study, currently we submitted for a grant, which is in the process, is to evaluate the microbiome. Looking at the baseline microbiome composition and the metabolomics with the risk of developing these IRAEs. And also to see how these changes in the composition of the microbiome from baseline to treatment and at the development of IRAEs predicts. So there are two main stool sample collection, which is at baseline and at 4 to 6 weeks after starting immunotherapy. If they develop IRAEs at that time, we would also be collecting stool sample. This would also give us a great detail into how these IRAEs develop and how we can help our patients better. Next slide, please. With our Latin American initiative, we're also looking at pharmacoeconomic analysis to describe the economic impact of weight-based versus fixed dose immune checkpoint inhibitor treatments, and if there is any correlation between these two and with the incidence of IRAEs and adverse events. Next one, please. So this is the study team that put this together with the work from many of us and also many people behind the scenes, including our patient advocates, Amy Geschwander and Anne-Marie Mercurio, and our study team, Mariah, Crystal, Matthew, Monica, and rest of them. This wouldn't have been possible without our patients and their caregivers. And the ask for me to come before you is to enroll onto this study and open at your sites so that we can answer the question, which would be very helpful in our clinical practice in everyday life to help our patients with a better quality of life.
Great.
Thank you very much, Dr. Gray. And
Okay,
rest of
great. Thank you very much, Dr. Guntura. So I think one of the take-homes here is, we spend a lot of time, especially in this committee, talking about therapeutic trials. There's also non-therapeutic trials that we have access to. And I think despite all of our efforts, at the end of the day, majority of patients are treated with standard of care. And this does represent another way that we can also still collect and learn from those patients that we are prescribing standard of care. So please do keep this study in mind. And with that, we'll move on now to the presentations within the medical oncology section. I wanted to take a moment just to give you a quick update on this study. We're gonna, the speakers in this session, I do ask that if we can be very focused and intentional about your take-home messages so we can maybe catch up on some time here. Dr. Osa, I think you are next. I see you walking away. I believe you have the next presentation after this. I'm just giving you a heads up. You may not want to get so far. Okay. All right. Just really quickly. So you guys know about the LungMap platform. This is a way that we can pre-screen patients. And in this study, it's really focused on patients who have received or are on a current or prior RET TKI, RET tyrosine kinase inhibitor. They can receive any one of the RET tyrosine kinase inhibitors. It is not a RET inhibitor. It is not specific to which inhibitor. And when they progress, even when they progress on those medications, then they will be eligible for this trial. One of the things that we are hoping with the LungMap platform, and one of the benefits of it, is that patients can pre-screen for this study and others while they're on current therapy. And this protocol is the first one under the LungMap umbrella where we allow local test results to be used to enroll patients on the study. If you do upload your local test results, you do still need tissue. The local test results can be from a tissue specimen analysis, or it can be from a liquid biopsy. If that local test result does happen to be from Foundation Medicine, from Foundation CDX, that we will accept that. And in that setting, you do not need to upload tissue. I was just talking to somebody earlier in the break about a patient that they waited until the patient progressed and then pre-screened them for one of the biomarker-driven arms, and talked about the turnaround time of 2 weeks and having that patient wait those 2 weeks. So I really encourage you, again, once you identify those patients, encourage you when you go back to your sites, talk to your providers, talk to your pharmacists, get a list and see all those patients that are prescribed on these RET inhibitors, and start approaching them from now so that you can be ready to just enroll them swiftly. Patients will be randomized to carboplatin and pemetrexed plus or minus selpercatinib, and then undergo maintenance therapy after that. So this is really focused on non-squamous histology. So with that, I don't see any questions in the chat or anyone making moves to the microphone, so I'll move on to the next protocol. Sorry, a lot of these slides were supposed to be hidden and they don't seem like they were. All right, so now we'll talk to Dr. Ray Osorio-Gabon and ask him to please come speak about the S1934 study, the NASSIST study. And as you listen to him talk about this study, this is one of the ones I really want to encourage everybody to open up at their site. This is a rare patient population. We need your help, and this is why we run trials like this through the cooperative group setting.
Thank you, Dr. Gray. Good afternoon, everyone. So S1934, which is the neoadjuvant chemoradiation with or without atezolizumab trial for patients with superior sulcus non-small cell lung cancer. This trial is a weird trial because we don't think of lung cancer as an orphan cancer, but this happens to be such an orphan type of lung cancer. Nobody sees a ton of these. But it's a very, very important subset of lung cancer because it's one of the most fiercely morbid subsets of lung cancer. Full of pain, full of neurologic injury, and full of bad outcomes. It traditionally has been the subset of lung cancers that theoretically are curable, but in which we failed most likely to cure. And therefore, standard care has gravitated sequentially over the decades towards combination therapy, combined modality therapy. This is actually the only standing subset of lung cancer for which the standard treatment is trimodality: chemotherapy, radiation therapy, and surgery. No controversy whatsoever. We started this trial because nobody else can do it. This is a type of trial that has to be done in the clinical trials network. We also did it in SWOG because we own this space. The practice-defining clinical trial that established trimodality therapy as a standard of care for superior sulcus non-small cell lung cancer was an intergroup trial that was led by SWOG. Single-arm phase 2 trial, and yet it changed the standard of care. And then subsequent to that, we did another smaller trial, again within SWOG. So this is our third bite, but this is us. We have excellence in this space. And I'm saying this because we do have challenges, and I think those challenges can be overcome. So what have we proposed to do? We have proposed a 1-to-1 randomized phase 2 trial of the standard of care, which is trimodality platinum doublet chemotherapy concurrently with modern dose definitive radiation therapy, after which patients go on to surgical resection. That's the standard treatment arm. And then the experiment is exactly that, with the addition of atezolizumab, given in 4 cycles prior to surgery, and then after surgery, a maintenance of 1 year. Our primary endpoint is pathologic complete remission. Those of you paying attention might recall that we actually had a survival primary endpoint. Event-free survival was our primary endpoint before. And then when Empower 010 led to FDA approval of atezolizumab in the adjuvant therapy setting, there was the debate, if you recall, we had last year about whether to stick or twist. And we decided that we would twist. So we changed our primary endpoint to PathCR, which would not be violated by whatever practice change happens in the adjuvant setting. And then we moved event-free survival to a secondary endpoint. So why would we want to do PathCR? Well, in this orphan subset of non-small cell lung cancer, the definitive practice change in clinical trial clearly demonstrated that PathCR was the most powerful correlate with long-term survival. In fact, when we started this protocol, that had been our desired primary endpoint. It was the NCI that made us change it. They wanted a survival endpoint. So it's paradoxical that when Empower turned out to change practice and led to FDA approval, the same NCI came back to us and said, thou shalt change your primary endpoint, and we finally acquiesced. We have secondary objectives: event-free survival, overall survival, surgical resection and complete resection rates, on and on, down to patient-centered endpoints, looking at general pain, cough, shortness of breath, fatigue. We also have the desire to collect biospecimens. This subset of lung cancer, one of the good things about it is specimens are easy to get at. These are not subtle. So pre-treatment biospecimens, and of course blood, and at the time of surgery, additional tissue. We are also interested in doing a radiomics correlative study as well. And our main selection criteria you see here, so superior sulcus tumors by definition are either T3 or T4. We are looking for N0 or N1. In my institution, unfortunately, the 2 or 3 superior sulcus patients that have come through since we opened this protocol have had N2 disease, so they were not eligible. All the usual suspects for exclusion criteria, you gotta be able to take every component of what we're calling quadri-modality experimental arm. So you gotta be able to take the chemotherapy, which is dealer's choice, doublet, platinum. You gotta be able to take the immunotherapy, you gotta be able to take the radiation, and of course the surgery. We currently have 70 sites open, but actually those 70 sites came from about 14, 15 institutions. And only one of them is an academic SWOG site. So I am begging, of course, that this is a scientifically interesting study. This is going to be the first randomized trial in superior sulcus. The one upon which our current practice is based was a single-arm phase 2 study 20 years ago. The reason why we're doing a comparative trial is because every component of the trimodality has changed in the 20 years. And of course, we have this special new opportunity with immune checkpoint inhibitor therapy to really transform the outcomes of what still remains a pretty difficult subset, albeit thankfully, a relatively rare subset of non-small cell lung cancer. Just remember, when these patients come to you, you will wish you had this trial open. Okay, so please help. Thanks.
I agree. Well said. Thank you very much.
Yep.
All right. Thank you, Ray. I really do want to reinforce what he said about encouraging all of us to get this study open at our site. I know we're working on getting it open and partnering very closely with our thoracic surgical oncology team, including Dr. Eric Tolosa, who we have in the audience here. So encourage you to do the same here, the same at your site as well. I think we've had a lot of lung map this meeting between the plenary, the lung map meetings. I think we're very familiar with this, and in the interest of time, we'll keep going. All right. I believe that Dr. Rangel, you are joining us virtually. Hopefully you're feeling better.
Well, I am joining virtually.
Okay, I understand. Well, we appreciate you hopping on. I'll be happy to drive your slides. He's going to be talking about lung map 1800D.
So I'll keep this very brief and donate some time back to the agenda. If you could go to the next slide. Next slide. S1800D is an excellent option for a clinical trial for your patients who have progressed on first-line immune checkpoint inhibitor containing therapy. This provides a treatment option, a trial option for patients who have never responded to prior immune checkpoint inhibitor, and those who have had some benefit and then progressed. So it is a very expansive trial in terms of who it lets in through eligibility criteria based on prior experience with immune checkpoint. And to remind everybody about what the experimental therapy is, this is combining pembrolizumab, which we're all very comfortable with an IL-15 based reagent in 803, an IL-15 superagonist. This is the phase 1b data for this has been published in Lancet Oncology, and in an experience in which we demonstrated evidence of clinical activity in these settings, and so we're extremely excited that this is an option for lung map patients, a concept I've been working on for 8 years. Our next slide. Our current accrual is below our current expectations, a total of 43, with only 5 patients being enrolled to the primary resistance cohort. Again, this is an excellent clinical trial option for patients after first-line immune checkpoint inhibitor containing therapy who don't qualify for a targeted arm on lung map. So if our accrual barriers we're addressing with pending stability data to address a pharmacy issue in terms of time from vial to the patient. But what seems to be the most critical issue is the number of sites that have this open. So if this is not open at your site, please open it. As the S1800A experience has demonstrated to us, the rate of accrual is directly proportional to the number of sites who have this open. It's currently open at half the number of sites that S1800A were, and we feel confident that if we were open at 2x the sites we're open at right now, that we would be on target. So please consider that opening this at your site, and once it's open, please accrue to this excellent potential therapy option for your patients.
Perfect. Thank you so very much, and wishing you and your family a speedy recovery. Thanks again for being here with us.
Yeah.
All right. All right, so next we have Dr. Suki Pada, who is joining us virtually as well, and she'll be giving us an update on S1900E. Dr. Pada?
Thanks, Dr. Gray. Hi, everybody. Nice to be with you this afternoon and evening. This is on behalf of my co-chair as well, Dr. David Gerber, who's at UT Southwestern. Next slide, please. So S1900E is asking the question is if we can be more precise in our delivery of sotorasib to our patients with previously treated KRAS G12C non-small cell lung cancer. We all know that sotorasib has accelerated approval as of May of 2021. We also know that as of September of this year, results from the randomized phase 3 code break study, which compared sotorasib to docetaxel, did hit its primary endpoint with improvement of progression-free survival over docetaxel, but the point estimates for objective response rate, median duration of response, and median overall survival were lower than what was seen in the initial CodeBreak 100 study. And very importantly, there was no overall survival difference seen between sotorasib and docetaxel. So I think the question does remain, can we be more precise in our selection of these KRAS G12C allosteric inhibitors for this patient population? So S1900E does have a robust upfront co-mutation biomarker definitions with also accounting for potential co-occurrence of these co-mutations. So there's an exclusive P53 cohort, STK11 cohort, and then for patients who do not fit the biomarker signatures of those first two cohorts, they can still enroll because there's this other cohort. The primary endpoint is objective response rate, and we'll be collecting liquid biopsies to determine mechanisms of resistance and potentially if they are different in patients with these different co-mutation patterns. Next slide, please. So this is a status update. I put these slides together a few weeks ago, so I have some updated numbers for you. We are 75 out of 116 patients accrued, so that's about 2/3 of the way, 33 in P53, 16 in STK11, and 26 in the sort of catch-all cohort. We have had 3 accruals in the last 30 days and 1 in the last 7 days. I'm happy to report that both P53 and STK11 cohorts are meeting their accrual goals quite nicely. Our catch-all cohort, however, is not. So I just want to emphasize, even if the patient does not have a co-mutation in P53 or STK11, they still can enroll in this trial through this cohort, and there's still plenty of slots available here. So given the accelerated approval of sotorasib, that it is available by a prescription in a medical oncologist clinic, we are constantly doing a continual reassessment of how we can make things easier. So we did have a big amendment in April of this year where we tried to liberalize the eligibility, including allowing untreated brain metastases and liberalization of washout windows. And we are looking again. Our accrual rates, in fact, dropped after we did this amendment, but perhaps there are other reasons for that. Working with Amanda Stamplis and Frank DeSanto from SWOG Communications, the CSIRB has just approved a social media toolkit and patient language-friendly handouts to explain why the study remains important in spite of the approval. So those should be rolled out to sites probably in early November. So we thank them for their partnership. Judy Johnson, our patient advocate, has been phenomenal in providing us feedback in terms of additional concerns, as there's been a lot of discussion after CodeBreak 200 results have been reported. And then working with Jennifer Beeler, our study protocol coordinator, she's working with the SWOG Ops office and our site coordinators committee to see, is there anything else we can do to try to make this easier for the investigators and their patients? Thanks so much.
Fantastic. And actually, Dr. Pata, one of the things that somebody brought up at one of the prior meetings is there a way similar to what we're doing on the RET study where you could take into consideration accepting local results for enrollment while still confirming things centrally? I don't know if you've thought about that. Thought that was a great question. I wanted to pass it on.
Yeah, so the one thing I will say is I think that the key thing is to screen on LungMap while patients are doing well on frontline therapy, especially because this drug is available in second line and we don't want delays in getting there. As for using local testing for biomarker assignment, I think that is an interesting idea. The one concern that I would have is that we know that pathogenicity in co-mutations, particularly STK11, KEAP1, NFE2L2, those definitions are evolving, and maybe not all panels as well include all of those. So I think that's a one advantage of the LungMap screening program for this particular protocol is because of the upfront rigorous co-mutations. So the way to overcome that is to screen patients while they're doing well on frontline therapy, so there's no lag time moving from frontline to second line
Yeah.
sotorasib.
You know, that's
Do
a
you have
good
other
point.
ideas?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point. So for this study, for your study in particular, it is well beyond just looking at KRAS G12C. It's really about understanding those co-mutations, and that's why for this study, we do need to use that lung map pre-screening approach. So that makes complete sense to me. Dr. Redmond?
Thanks.
Yeah.
Where we can, we'll try to expand, but this is not one of
This is
those
just not one
settings
of
where
those.
we really
We don't have
need
the
to do that.
opportunity,
Yeah.
right? Yeah, we can't miss it. Understood. Thank you for the consideration. Appreciate it. I'm going to go back a little. We got some questions here in the chat. That's Dr. Rangel. I don't know if you are still on. I'm going to, Dr. Rustavan, just so you know, you're up next. The question here, is there a possibility that pembrolizumab can be provided for 1800D? I don't know if you're still on. That's for Dr. Rangel. I don't believe it is provided for right now, but we'll definitely follow up with him and the study team regarding that. Oh, thank you, Judy, for emailing him as well. And then we had one other thing in the chat here. And that was really, Judy's fully endorsing Ray's study and encouraging everybody to please consider opening this trial, that this is really, those patients with superior cell cancers need this study and deserve up-to-date treatment. So thank you very much for that comment. All right, we'll move on to Dr. Rustavan's MAVERICK study.
Thank you for the opportunity to present. My name is Chad Rustovan. I'm a radiation oncologist at the University of Colorado. And this is the SWOG S1827 MAVERICK study. Here's the protocol. This is looking at brain MRI surveillance plus or minus prophylactic cranial irradiation for patients with small cell lung cancer. It includes both limited and extensive stage disease. This is the randomization. It's a straightforward one-to-one randomized trial. All patients get brain MRI staging and MRI surveillance, and the randomization is to prophylactic cranial irradiation versus not. The primary endpoint is overall survival with the non-inferiority hypothesis. The study seeks to demonstrate that MRI surveillance alone would be non-inferior to MRI surveillance with PCI. Oops, going back. So just some notes on the trial. So this is the first ever randomized trial looking at MRI surveillance plus or minus PCI in limited stage disease. So that's never been done before. And it's kind of a tiebreaker trial for extensive stage disease. So as people are familiar with, there's one randomized trial that showed a survival benefit and one randomized trial from Japan subsequently that showed no overall survival benefit. And so PCI remains a standard option for extensive stage disease. We have some opportunities here. Recently, there was closure of two very important randomized trials that were led by the NRG group, but also endorsed in SWOG. One was NRG LU005, and that's chemoradiation plus or minus atezo for limited stage disease that accrued extremely well. And then there's NRG CC003, which was also in limited and extensive stage disease, looking at PCI plus or minus hippocampal avoidance. And both of those trials completed successful accrual of over 300 and 400 patients in each trial. And so as those trials have closed, hopefully there's an opportunity here to open this trial at more centers and also to encourage accrual at centers that have had both of those studies open along with MAVERICK. My center is one of those centers that had both of those studies open. And so we've been able to offer the MAVERICK study to more patients. Another thing that I would emphasize is that MAVERICK is intended to be a pragmatic trial with low barriers to accrual. So it's very welcoming to different practice patterns. All NCCN endorsed first-line therapies are eligible to go on this study. The study also allows hippocampal avoidance PCI at the discretion of the treating physician, and that's tracked prospectively for planned subgroup analyses. We also allow salvage radiosurgery And we have a posture of allowing dual enrollments on other clinical trials wherever appropriate. So the trial currently has accrued 115 patients. So, and we're accruing about 5 patients per month. So that's below our initial accrual goal, but it's still a really substantial amount of patients for this randomization, which is a pretty difficult randomization for patients and providers because people bring a lot of have a lot of opinions about the role of PCI up front. And so it really does take a lot of effort and thoughtfulness on the part of providers who are offering this trial to demonstrate to patients why this is an important question and why PCI has been delivered historically in this population and why it's so important to determine whether it's still appropriate in the MRI era. So I do want to thank the SWOG committee and all those investigators here for supporting this trial. It's a really important trial to answer this question, and thank you for all of your efforts supporting us, and we'll continue to try to promote this trial going forward.
Thank you very much. Excellent. All right. Next, we have Dr. Nagla Karim, who's joining us virtually and going to give us an update on S1929, and really impressed with the effort that her team undertook to get this accomplished and really record-breaking accrual. So congratulations, Dr. Karim.
Thank you so much. So my name is Nagla Karim. I'm a medical oncologist at the SWOG Cancer Institute, and this is the S1929 phase 2 study of maintenance atezolizumab versus atezo plus talazoparib. So basically, the trial is in extensive stage small cell lung cancer. Patients will have received already the 2 to 4 cycles of the combination of the platinum plus etoposide, plus the atezolizumab as standard of care. Then patients will be, during that time, tested for SLFN11 biomarker, and only patients who are SLFN11 positive and continue to meet the eligibility criteria were randomized into Arm A, standard of care atezo, versus Arm B, atezolizumab plus talazoparib, the PARP inhibitor, until disease progression. So this is a maintenance trial in only SLFN11 positive patients. Primary objective has been the progression-free survival, with secondary objectives of overall survival, response rate, and our TM objectives. So next, please. Basically, these being the major eligibility criteria, mainly the SLFN11 positivity, and as you see, the standard other criteria. Next. So here it was activated in June 2020, and in spite of the COVID pandemic, the study did meet the enrollment in around those 2 years. The screening goal was 323. However, 309 patients have been already screened, and the screening is closed now. And there were 204 patients SLFN11 positive, and 55 patients SLFN11 negative. Amongst the 204, 103 patients were randomized to step 2. Basically, I would say the median time to test for SLFN11 has been 4 days, and more than 90% of patients had basically the test come back in less than 10 days. Those that showed the maximum were basically patients who did not have enough tissue to report, but it was a timely process. I would say that we're still waiting the final analysis for the results of the progression-free survival, but until now, we'll have a few weeks until we finalize the step 2 randomization. Thank you so much for all your support for the clinical trial, and hopefully this will be useful for our patients.
Wonderful. Congratulations again to your team, you and your team. Thank you for the update. Okay, we're going to have Dr. Daly come up and present on 1933. I think you have the next two presentations.
Thank you. I'm presenting on behalf of Dr. Ajmalali, who could not be here today. This is a S1933, his pilot study of hypofractionated radiotherapy, followed by atezo consolidation in stage 2 or 3 non-small cell lung cancer patients with borderline performance status. And just a brief background on this study for anyone not familiar with it. This is a clinical scenario that many of us see regularly, and there's really a lack of an evidence-based approach for these poor performance patients or borderline performance patients who cannot undergo standard of care concurrent chemoradiation. And this hypofractionated regimen that is used on this protocol, the 60 and 15, has been well studied through trials at UT Southwestern and others, and is commonly used in this setting. And immune checkpoint inhibitors are appealing in this setting as they're typically better tolerated than chemotherapy. Before we get to the schema, the key inclusion criteria for S1933, upfront prior to radiation, patients should have stage 3 lung cancer, performance status 2, or stage 2, performance status 0 to 2, who are not surgical candidates. After completing radiation, they must have received at least 45 gray and cannot have had disease progression. They are then randomized, they then can go on to the non-randomized design, they can go on to atezo consolidation. Patients who have autoimmune disease are excluded, interstitial lung disease, or grade 3 or higher pneumonitis. And we see here the schema. Again, this is a non-randomized design, upfront hypofractionated radiation, reassessment, and then atezo. And their team is a little past the halfway point on accrual, so we would really love to see this study pick up and complete accrual sometime relatively soon. It's open at 92 institutions around the country, and there's some, I'm actually not super familiar with this change in the protocol DLCO, but it looks like if you have questions about the PFTs, reach out to the study PI, or with any suggestions on how to increase accrual to this study. Next, I'm going to briefly discuss S1914 again. I mentioned this very briefly in my earlier presentation, but this is a randomized phase 3 trial in early stage medically inoperable non-small cell lung cancer, looking at standard of care SBRT as compared to SBRT with the addition of atezolizumab. Here is our schema, where our goal is to accrue 480 patients. And you can see our control arm here is standard of care stereotactic radiation. This is the standard of care for early stage medically inoperable non-small cell lung cancer. On the experimental arm, patients receive a total of 6 months or 8 cycles of atezolizumab given as neoadjuvant, concurrent, and adjuvant with stereotactic radiation initiated cycle 3. A couple of key points about this study. Patients are required to have a high-risk feature, so a tumor of at least 2 centimeters, or an SUV of 6.2, or intermediate or high-grade histology. You don't have to have all 3. One of the 3 is sufficient, but this was to prevent extremely low-risk patients from enrolling who might not benefit from the addition of atezo. That is a relatively pragmatic design. We're allowing a whole range of SBRT fractionation schedules, anywhere from 3 to 8 fractions. Most of the commonly used schedules are allowed on protocol. We are not using a placebo, which we've gotten a lot of feedback is very appealing to patients to not have to come in for placebo infusions. And it's only 6 months of immunotherapy. The other studies open in this space are using 1 to 2 years of drugs. So we do think that is a feature of our study that should be appealing as well. And then we did have a recent amendment that we're hoping will help enhance accrual as well. And we tried to make a couple of clarifications on key points that we'd been getting a lot of questions about. So ground glass component does count toward the diameter. We're allowing up to 2 synchronous early stage primaries. We added an 8 fraction regimen because we'd had a lot of requests for that from investigators, especially for ultracentral tumors. We no longer are requiring minimum PFT values. We felt they were no longer supported by the literature. And we provided some clarifications on response assessment.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So next, Dr. Chang will come speak. Sorry, I was using the microphone. Next, Dr. Chang will come give us a quick update, hopefully on Insignia. Dr. Chang.
Thank you. I changed my slides this year. I sort of snazzed them up. It's as you know, this is a randomized phase 3 study, first-line PD-L1 positive, And here's the schema. So arm 1 is pembro alone, followed by chemo if you progress. Arm B is pembro alone, and then you add chemo to that if you progress. That's a really important post-progression question. And then arm C is our standard chemo IO. And I think this trial is, the co-primary is OS in arms A and B each versus arm C. And we're also going to look at a prognostic signature for pembro, a predictive signature for chemo plus pembro. We developed a couple of different questions that I'm going to go back to, but these are the key questions. Can we avoid chemo? Can we spare that, delay it? Does adding chemo post-progression boost response? And there is data from the EMPOWER-1 that if you, I think there's 64 patients who got chemo added to the cemiplimab, and they actually had a longer overall survival, 15 months. So I think this is a really pertinent question. And I would say, we've seen real-world analyses that have shown sort of conflicting ideas on whether IO is better or combination with respect to PFS or OS, and this is Suki Pata highlighted it at ASCO that this is the prospective study to answer that question. So I think if you're interested in that question, and I certainly am, and a lot of patients are, I think that this is important to put patients on. We have 853 patients. No, sorry. We have accrued 453 out of 846. So we're more than halfway, but we would like to pick it up. So I'm going to use the Ray O strategy of saying, please put your patients on. If you each put on a couple patients, then we'll be finished. And I was thinking, what could I do? Maybe I'll send you a poem, maybe about science if you, oh, never mind, or bake cookies, something like that. But no, I think it's an important trial, and please do consider it. A couple of things that make it a little bit easier. Sorry, can't really read this, but so you can have either measurable or non-measurable disease permitted, so you can have a malignant pleural effusion. We are trying to collect tissue, we're getting tissue, but it is something that if you don't have enough tissue, you can still put the patient on. Patients with asymptomatic brain mets can go on trial, and if you need treatment for those brain mets, we do ask for 2 weeks of washout, and then prednisone 10, but you can do a head CT to just show stability. So these are some of the things that we changed in order to make it easier to put patients on. Then lastly, I'll just say, so people say, well, the 1 to 49 is still problematic. We did look and see, we've got about 50% of patients over 50, but also 50% of patients that are accrued that are in the 1 to 49 range. And we do, I personally, this is anecdotal, I have a patient with lower PD-L1 who's doing fine. I think that, some patients don't feel comfortable. So some people may not feel as comfortable putting those patients on single IO. If you have lots of burden of disease or you need a really quick response, understandably. But this is a trial that if you're going to check at a very early time point to see if they have response. So I think that, and it's answering a really important question. So please do consider this trial. How many of you do have this open at your site? Could you see? So fantastic. Everybody puts on 2 in the next 6 months, and we'll be almost there. So thank you for your time.
That was great. Thank you so very much. All right, next. All right. Next we have, we're not Helena, you, sorry about that. Next we have Dr. Sarah Goldberg talking about a ECOG study, and she's a champion for this study, so it's great to have her here to be able to talk about it. And Dr. Reckamp, you are up next.
Hi, everyone. So this is continuing the begging portion of the program now. So I'm going to talk to you about...
I'm going to change the title.
Change the title, yeah. So this is a randomized phase 3 trial combining osimertinib with bevacizumab for patients with EGFR mutant lung cancer. I'm going to skip the background, which I think you all probably know, and just show you this schema. And so I think this is the only first-line EGFR trial that we have through the ETCN. And it is a very straightforward design, easy to enroll to. And again, it's for patients for untreated metastatic EGFR positive lung cancer randomized to osimertinib alone, standard of care, or osimertinib with the addition of bevacizumab. This question has been attempted to be asked with other EGFR inhibitors with consistent improvement in progression-free survival. And now the question is, can adding a VEGF inhibitor improve outcomes when added to osimertinib? And so the goal accrual here is 300 patients. It is moving along, but not so quickly. So the current accrual is 66, and that's slow overall. But the sad thing to me is that only 6 are from SWOG. I think the main issue is that we haven't opened it yet at Yale. So once we get it open, I think accrual is going to pick up. So we're close though, probably in the next week or 2. So I would really encourage you all to consider opening this trial. I know there's other EGFR trials out there that are not cooperative group trials, but if you don't have a trial for your EGFR patients in the first line setting, again, this is a really straightforward one, easy to accrue to, pretty open with eligibility, and should be considered if you see these patients and don't have a competing trial. We'd really appreciate your support. Happy to take questions, or if you want to email me with issues with accrual, happy to talk more about it. Thank you so much.
Fantastic. Thank you so very much. So you heard about we have a really great trial portfolio to help cover a lot of patients. And so please do keep these trials in mind. So wonderful, we have Dr. Reckkamp here. I'm sorry, I am going to introduce you officially, just to know you. All right, so really excited to have our last speaker today. We saved the best for last. So Dr. Reckkamp has really been a pillar within the lung committee as well as within LungMap, and sharing some really exciting data and a new initiative. I do want to preface this a little bit by saying thank you so much to Mariah Norman and Dana Sparks for helping to move things very swiftly. I don't know if they're still in the room. All right, so Dr. Reckkamp is a professor. Dr. Reckkamp is a professor of medicine and director of the Division of Medical Oncology at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center. She received her master's degree in clinical investigation from the Department of Biomathematics at UCLA. She serves as the Associate Center Director for Clinical Research at the Samuel Ochin Comprehensive Cancer Institute. She obtained her medical degree at University of Chicago Pritzker School of Medicine in 1998, and was AOA, of course, AFIA, and trained in internal medicine at Washington University Barnes-Jewish Hospital. Dr. Reckkamp completed fellowship training in hematology oncology at the David Geffen School of Medicine in UCLA in 2004, and completed a master's degree in clinical research also. So she leads many phase 1, 2, and 3 studies funded by the NCI, internal funds, and industry. She's a member of ASCO, AACR, the National Association for the Study of Lung Cancer, and SWOG. She's participated in SWOG Leadership Development Program and led the Scientific Committee for the Metastatic Lung Committee for the ASCO annual meeting, and we all know that's a lot of work. Dr. Reckkamp has been the past recipient of many honors, including ALA Lung Force Honoree in 2008, and she has authored or co-authored numerous abstracts in the field of thoracic oncology, and has been active in the investigation of MET-altered lung cancer. And so with that, we thank Dr. Reckkamp for being here with us and giving us our second keynote talk.
Thank you, Janelle. And I appreciate that I am the last thing between us and the reception, which fortunately is not going down here, so we're not watching people having their glass of wine, but I understand that that's what's going on probably already, and want to get you done with the day. But I appreciate the chance to talk today about LungMap and S1800A. We've heard a lot from the plenary to multiple meetings, but I think that this is a paradigm that we can look at toward looking at multiple diseases, and hopefully utilize this as we think about moving data into the phase 3 setting in the future. So just to give the data from the S1800A, parts of this have been presented in multiple formats, but really this started as we needed therapy for patients who have progressed on prior PD-1, PD-L1 inhibitors, and most patients are receiving these inhibitors now even in the early stage setting. And we really don't have standard therapies outside of chemotherapy or chemotherapy and ramucirumab for these patients. And so this is a high area of unmet need for our patients. We know that VEGF is important in modulating the tumor microenvironment and that it can alter PD-L1 expression, T cells, MDSCs, and that by blocking VEGF, we can improve the tumor milieu and decrease some of this tumor immunosuppression. We know that VEGF receptor 2 specifically can decrease infiltration of immune cells and increase maturing dendritic cells. And then we also know that combination of pembrolizumab and ramucirumab may overcome resistance by upregulation of pro-inflammatory cytokines and activating cytotoxic T cells. Immune therapy with VEGF or VEGF receptor inhibitors have been approved in multiple tumor types. These are immune checkpoint naive, but we have multiple combinations, both including antibodies and TKIs. And as you know, that pembrolizumab is a anti-programmed death 1 monoclonal antibody. Ramucirumab is a monoclonal antibody targeting VEGF receptor 2. And we did see some preliminary activity in a phase 1 trial, and this was performed by Roy Herbst and Valley and their team, and again saw responses in patients who hadn't received prior immunotherapy, but the combination did demonstrate responses even with patients with PD-L1 low, and was safe and tolerable to give. So again, we have talked about LungMap, but really this is the platform that made this trial feasible. We had 2 industry partners, both Merck and Lilly, were able to work together to move drugs forward in a rational combination, and that trust and partnership helped to move things along. And again, LungMap has been discussed in detail, but in this trial, we decided for this unmatched sub-study, this was going to be a randomized phase 2 design, and with the guidance of our stellar Mary Redmond, we have decided on overall survival as the primary endpoint. And as we see these studies in the ICI refractory setting, negative results potentially, we understand that overall survival is really the important endpoint that we need to be evaluating. And so this was the schema of the study, and again, patients either receive pembrolizumab and ramucirumab or investigators' choice of chemotherapy single agent or docetaxel ramucirumab. And patients were stratified by PD-L1 expression, histology, and the intent to receive ramucirumab. And the main eligibility were patients who had received prior PD-1, PD-L1 therapy and had been on for at least 84 days and had received prior platinum-based doublet chemotherapy. These are just the patient characteristics. The squares are a little bit off, but we did see a little discordance in performance status, and PD-L1 was there were low PD-L1s in the ramucirumab pembrolizumab arm. But overall, we did see an improvement in survival. So hazard ratio 0.69 and a p-value of 0.05. And the median overall survival went to 14.5 months, which is really unheard of in this second-line setting. And the standard of care did quite well too. And again, most of the patients had received docetaxel and ramucirumab in the standard of care arm. When we looked at subgroups, we saw that most subgroups had some benefit and hazard ratios were less than 1. There was really no difference in hazard ratio based on PD-L1 status. And we saw a pronounced benefit in squamous cell and those who had received chemo followed by immunotherapy. That is in part because patients had initially come in through the S1400 series, which was specifically squamous cell. But we didn't see any true patterns. Progression-free survival was not improved. And again, we've talked about this, that we see this, this prolongation of benefit, and you do see the tails improved in the pembrolizumab and ramucirumab arm, and so there is a longer progression-free time for some of the patients, and there were no groups that had differential benefit, but they tended toward benefit with the pembrolizumab and ramucirumab. And overall survival was also not different. The toxicities you see here, we looked at, this is just showing grade 3 to 5. The toxicities is as you would expect for chemotherapy and as you would expect for immunotherapy and VEGF inhibition. We did see some increase in vascular events with ramucirumab, pembrolizumab, but not different than those who received ramucirumab in the standard of care arm. So overall, the toxicities are as we know them, and no real surprise. And so overall survival really is the important endpoint, and Dr. Gandera has coined the term post-progression prolongation of survival, which is something that we do see in this setting, in the refractory setting. So, and really this is the first time we see a chemotherapy, a regimen without a chemotherapy backbone to show survival benefit compared to standard of care, and especially in a standard of care that the majority received docetaxel ramucirumab and utilizing the lung map platform. So we want to do a further study, and this has been discussed in various ways, and this is just a taste as it is still in development. But again, our goal now, we have a study, the overall survival has been improved with drugs that we know the toxicities of and know that they're approved and relatively safe without a lot of overlapping toxicities. So we're working with companies that have differing goals and have two different companies, which doesn't make it easy to move things forward. And we have an area of unmet need. And if you poll a group of oncologists whether the phase 2 study is enough information to start using ramucirumab pembrolizumab, you probably get somewhere close to a 50-50 split or something in that area, but people would definitely not, you wouldn't see a consensus on utilizing it based on a phase 2 trial. So how do we move this forward? So with a lot of work on the part of the investigators here, our partners through the LungMap team and SWOG as the lead, but also with our other NCTN groups, we have been able to forge a partnership again with Merck and Lilly and with the NCI and CTEP and with the FDA in order to come up with a design that will promote broad participation by patients, so something we've been talking a lot about, and empower our investigators to treat patients as they would in their standard practice, and remove some of the barriers for enrollment and data collection, which everybody has complained about over the last few days where we've been sitting here. And so we all are understaffed and want trials that are simple. And so we bring you Project Pragmatica, again, still in development, but this is a prospective randomized study of ramucirumab plus pembrolizumab versus standard of care for participants who had previously received immunotherapy for stage 4 recurrent non-small cell lung cancer. Our sample size is planned at 700 patients, and our primary endpoint, again, overall survival. The group, Dr. Dragneff and I are the chair and co-chair, and Wade Ames is the champion from ECOG. Our statisticians, Mary Redmond and Jailing Mao, and we have a lung community engagement subcommittee representative, Daniel Carrizosa. And importantly, in this study, one of the biggest differences is our standard of care is based on NCCN guidelines, but not specifically prescribed, as we are open to the idea that the standard of care may change. And so, and then the patients will be They will be stratified by performance status, 0 to 1 versus 2. So we are including performance status 2, and the most recent therapy being immune checkpoint inhibitor or not, yes or no. So that's where we're at. And again, we're looking only at overall survival. So just a highlight is we are not requiring patients to have scans on the study for entry, but even for progression, we will allow any scans that they have, but they aren't required to be submitted. And the questions on the data forms are going to be in the opinion of the investigator: has the patient progressed? Has the patient started new therapy? Is the patient alive? Those are the simple things. And we have to collect some data on toxicity because it's 2 investigational agents combined, but we're sticking that to high levels of grade 3 and higher related toxicities for this. So I know it's been a long day.
This has been fantastic. Thank you so very much. Dr. Reckamp. We'll open the floor to any questions, and I just want to highlight what Dr. Reckamp just said, is that, you know, when we think about the studies that we've done in the past, and even some of the ones we've heard here, and even with having Dr. Matt talk about all the TM opportunities, we also need to balance that with trials such as this, where we allow patients with the ECOG 0 to 2 to enroll, patients without measurable disease can enroll, patients who we do not have to provide tissue samples. And this will allow us, again, to better penetrate the communities, meet the patients where they are, answer key questions while still reaching diverse patient populations. So.
And we've been doing the balance between LungMap and the Pragmatica study, and really, patient doesn't have tissue, patient doesn't have measurable disease, they can all be shifted to Pragmatica. So that's kind of the goal, is that we see them as complementary, and hope that people will be excited about easing the study site. Hopefully our study staff will jump for joy and and go home early rather than late one day from the clinic. So, but I welcome any questions, any thoughts on the eligibility or the standard of care arm. All of these things we've spent hours going back and forth about, but we're close to putting this out there in the world. And the study team at SWOG and our partners at the FDA and CTEP, they have moved this rapidly through. I mean, as Mary had mentioned earlier in one of the meetings, we got the results for S1800A sometime early this year, and we are now hopefully going to open a phase 3 trial based on that data within a year. So
fantastic.
I've never been on a train going this fast.
I don't think any of us have, but it's very exciting and uncomfortable at the same time, right? Yes. All right, great. Really, this is, I really wanted to end with this because this is a first-in-kind type trial also. And this, I think, can hopefully serve as a platform as we think about how to move clinical research into the future. So please keep this in mind, and we will keep you updated as we continue to make progress. Thank you so very much, everybody. I think we are in San Francisco, I believe. Yes. All right. So we'll see you in San Francisco, and thanks again to everybody here as well as our patients.